The amber glow of a solitary torchlight danced across the damp, moss-covered brick of the archive wall. There is a comforting stillness here, a silence broken only by the gentle friction of aged parchment being unrolled. We are reaching back into the past, not with urgency, but with the quiet patience required to understand the deepest truths hidden within the historical record. The year is 1907. An era of grand machines and expanding empires, yet one still profoundly dependent upon the unseen forces of physics. We begin our descent into this moment with a feeling of deep wonder. Consider the scale of human endeavor, the telegraph networks humming beneath the oceans, the massive dynamos supplying the electric heartbeat of capital cities. It was a time when the world seemed suddenly loud, yet few stopped to contemplate the sounds that were being drowned out. This deep vibration, this hum, is the subject of our investigation tonight. A sense of quiet reflection settles as we examine the initial sketches. They are drawn on thick, fibrous paper, the ink faded to a gentle brown. The lines are meticulous, showing intricate schematics for devices that look less like technology and more like esoteric art. They speak to a mind obsessed, not with utility, but with revelation. The inventor sought to listen, truly listen, to the very foundation of his world. There is a powerful nostalgia in these archival remnants. They evoke the scent of coal smoke, the rhythmic clatter of the new electric trams, and the heavy, humid air of a thriving metropolis. London at the turn of the century was a nervous system of stone and steel, pulsating with millions of lives. But to Professor Silas Thorne, it was more than just a place of commerce and noise, it was an enormous, low-frequency acoustic instrument, playing a tune no one noticed. Our overriding curiosity compels us to trace the path of these documents. Why were they not filed with the Royal Society? Why were they found instead, pressed flat within the spine of a dusty, forgotten police ledger 3 years after the fact? These details are the archival equivalent of a whisper in an empty cathedral. They command attention, yet demand absolute silence for comprehension. We hold here the essence of a forgotten pursuit, the desire to measure the silence between the sounds. The massive energy generated by a city's life, its trains, its plumbing, its deep structural settling, must resolve somewhere. Thorne theorized that this energy condensed into a constant, fundamental hum, an almost geologic vibration that defined the city's presence. This hum, he believed, was not random. It possessed a structure, a linguistic character. It was the collective subconscious of the architecture, a continuous resonance that acted as the city's slow, mechanical thought. The documents we are reviewing focus entirely on the copper coil, the core of his invention. Imagine an apparatus of breathtaking scale and simplicity, miles of fine-gauge copper wire, intricately wound around massive ferroconcrete cores, designed not to transmit power, but to receive the faint, deep, near-infrasonic sound waves emanating from the bedrock. The professor was not interested in what people said, he was interested in what the structures felt. What drives a scientist to reject the visible, audible world in favor of an entirely theoretical field of study? His notes reveal a growing certainty that this ULF frequency, this subterranean hum, carried complex data, the stress, the load, the quiet plans embedded in the foundations of the metropolis. He believed this hum could be translated, not just heard. The chilling notion is this: if the city itself possesses a resonance, and that resonance can be decoded, what happens when the recorded sound does not match the known reality? We must proceed with a calm, deliberate pace, following Thorne's methodical, yet profoundly unsettling, journey into the abyss of urban acoustics. Our mounting sense of excitement is tempered by the archival record's inherent tragedy. We know, having examined the full ledger, that this pursuit ended suddenly and disastrously for Professor Thorne. But the journey itself, chronicled in these fragmented notes, provides a rare window into a magnificent obsession. The schematics for the copper coil show a device so huge it could not be placed above ground without attracting impossible scrutiny. This leads us to the element of secrecy. The drawings meticulously detail where the coil had to be placed for optimal reception, deep within a forgotten, long-decommissioned sewer pumping station. A location perfect for isolating the experiment from surface noise, and equally perfect for isolating the experiment from the world. The cold, damp environment, the constant, low-frequency rumble of the subterranean environment, it became Thorne's dedicated laboratory. A feeling of isolation permeates these notes. Thorne worked alone, aided only by a single, unnamed engineer who later disappears from the record just as completely as the professor. The work was demanding, filthy, and entirely hidden. He was listening to the city's heart from a place where the city had forgotten it even possessed chambers. The technical specifications detail the exact construction of the apparatus, a dense thicket of copper wire, precisely insulated, requiring constant maintenance against the corrosive damp. The sheer effort involved speaks to an unshakable belief in his hypothesis. It was a commitment that moved beyond science and into a kind of devotional act. We encounter a quiet passage in the notes where Thorne describes the process of tuning the coil. He writes of sitting for hours in the cold, near absolute darkness, waiting for the frequency response to stabilize. He compares the process not to tuning a radio, but to waiting for a geological shift. The patience required for this work must have been immense. What drives an academic to risk his reputation and his safety for a truth no one else can even perceive? The pursuit of fundamental revelation is a powerful, dangerous motivator. His initial recorded results are cryptic, long columns of numbers, complex wave forms, and annotations referencing shifts in the structural pressure vector. Then, in a sudden shift of tone, the notes move from dry scientific documentation to excited, almost manic observation. He reports a breakthrough. The apparatus is no longer just detecting vibrations, it is producing a coherent, repetitive signature. This signal was not merely a physical record of stress. Thorne believed he had found the syntactic unit of the hum. This realization is the point of no return. What if the underlying structure of a human city, its mass and its arrangement, is fundamentally communicative? The atmosphere of discovery emanating from the next set of documents is almost palpable. Thorne began to devote himself to translating the signal. He developed a proprietary encryption key based on the relative densities of the stone and clay beneath the city, believing the geological foundation was the literal alphabet for the hum. This pursuit creates an air of profound suspicion. Why, if this was a valid scientific endeavor, did he not contact his university? Why did he intensify his secrecy, instead of seeking validation? The archival records, or rather the lack thereof, suggest a growing realization on Thorne's part: the city's message was not meant for public consumption. The work became faster, the handwriting more rushed. The journal pages detail a system of translation tables, a grid matching specific vibrational signatures, e.g., the rhythmic settling of the Thames embankment, to phonemes or abstract concepts. It is an extraordinary attempt to build a language from geometry and gravity. A sense of foreboding enters the script when he first records the continuous, coherent text. He transcribed columns of data that, when run through his key, began to yield recognizable, if fragmented, prose. His initial findings were mundane: structural reports, stress levels, and thermal fluctuations. But then, the tenor of the message changed. He recorded the text not as a continuous stream, but as a map overlaid onto the city's existing geographic coordinate system. The data, when plotted, did not describe the London above him, but a network of streets, districts, and structures that did not exist. What happens when a scientist achieves a breakthrough that fundamentally contradicts all established reality? Is it madness, or is it a revelation that the world is simply not what we perceive it to be? The concept is startling: an unbuilt city, a phantom infrastructure running parallel to the real one, mapped out not in blueprints, but in silent, constant sonic data. This is the moment where the archival record shifts from scientific inquiry to high paranoia. Thorne theorized that this ghost city was not a prediction, but a plan, an active, organized structure maintained by the constant resonance of London itself. He was charting an alternative reality that was always present, hidden by its own fundamental vibration. The journal entries detailing the ghost layout are frantic. He attempts to correlate the ULF map streets with known underground tunnels, hidden water lines, or abandoned railway lines, searching for a physical manifestation of the second plan. He finds nothing. The unbuilt city is entirely informational, defined only by the Vibrations of the known world. The most critical archival document is the unsent letter to his fiancée, Henrietta. We approach this text with a feeling of deep, human pity. This is the final, non-scientific record of the professor's state of mind. It is written in a hurried, yet clear hand, the ink slightly smeared as if the hand were shaking. He outlines his discovery, not with pride, but with terror. He writes that the city's resonance is generating two continuous data streams, the known reality, and the alternate, informational one. He states the ghost map is becoming clearer, more defined. The sentence that arrests our attention, providing the core viral hook, is recorded in this letter: a second plan is now active. The letter contains no context for this statement, only the chilling finality of its declaration. The use of the word active suggests immediate implementation, not future planning. A moment of intense anxiety is captured in the archive's analysis of the letter's composition. It was stamped, addressed, and placed in his coat pocket, but never mailed. Why the sudden hesitation? Did he realize the true scope of the discovery only after he had sealed the envelope? The archives present us with a crucial visual, a single, faint image of the pumping station entrance, taken from the 1910 police investigation supplement. It is grainy, black and white, showing only a bricked-up archway. But the quality is sufficient to notice that the bricks look new, too fresh for a supposedly long decommissioned site. We are forced to ask, what would prompt a powerful governmental or non-governmental authority to risk an obvious cover-up rather than allowing a scientific claim to be dismissed as madness? The scale of the demolition points away from simple industrial waste and toward high-level security clearance. How does a man react when he realizes the knowledge he pursued is not merely theoretical, but actively dangerous to himself and the established order? The isolation must have been total. The subsequent police report, filed by an inspector who was quietly transferred shortly thereafter, details the unauthorized demolition. He notes that the crew wore non-standard uniforms, refused identification, and claimed they were acting under direct Privy Council orders, a claim the inspector could not verify and which was later refuted by the council itself. This level of bureaucratic erasure points to a precise and efficient cleanup. The entire operation lasted less than 3 days. Thorne, his copper coil, his journals and his unnamed engineer were all vanished, reduced to an archival blank space. The official file was closed with the verdict: accidental drowning due to structural failure. We now examine the quiet dread woven into the remnants of the police files. The inspector's supplementary notes, found separately and unofficially, focus heavily on the geological impact. He writes of the unusual nature of the demolition, not a chaotic collapse, but a precise, thorough destruction of the interior, designed to leave the outer shell intact but the internal space utterly inaccessible. The feeling of inevitability settles upon us. It was a cover-up designed not to hide a mistake, but to conceal a profound, destabilizing truth. The object of the demolition was the copper coil, the great listening ear of the city. The goal was to silence the resonance. The archival silence following 1907 is the most damning evidence. Thorne's name vanishes from the Royal Society registry. His fiancée is quietly resettled. His work is nowhere to be found, not even in the deepest, most chaotic of the government's scientific scrap heaps. This total erasure suggests the discovery was considered an existential threat. The unbuilt city was not merely a curious data point, its very existence must have compromised a long-term, established power structure. The secondary infrastructure, silent and vibrational, could not be allowed to be known. What is more terrifying, a secret plot managed by powerful men, or an autonomous, resonant plan managed by the city itself, operating outside of human intention? Thorne may have discovered not a human conspiracy, but a fundamental truth of urban sentience. Our final moments of examination focus on the simple, recurring phrase, "a second plan is now active." The terror lies in the present tense. It did not become active, it is now active. This suggests that the silent, resonant city, mapped by the copper coil over a century ago, is not a relic of the past. It is an enduring, unseen reality, constantly updating and revising itself based on the subterranean hum, the noise we choose not to hear. We conclude with a profound sense of disquiet. The destruction of the pumping station was successful in silencing Thorne, but did it silence the city? The copper coil, in its brief moment of operation, proved that the noise exists, that the resonance is real, and that it contains an alternate design. The physical device is gone, but the fundamental physics remain. This leads us to the archival bridge, the crucial element of continuity. The documents we will examine next detail the fragmented police report, the unusual texture of the paper, and the unauthorized use of demolition crews. These details begin to build the case that the cover-up was messy, leaving traces that an outside mind, an analyst, historian, or perhaps just a very curious listener, could piece together. The final, soft-spoken question of the hour: if the city once whispered about an alternate design in 1907, what is the enormous, technological metropolis of today resonating with? The police documents, heavily water-damaged and relegated to a forgotten appendix, offer a different kind of map. They do not chart streets, but they chart the sudden appearance and disappearance of power. Yet the pages hinted at truths that no scholar had dared read aloud, specifically regarding the identity of the workers who handled the evidence. We must now turn our attention to the immediate aftermath, and the suspicious nature of the official silence. The distant echo of a university bell tolls softly, muffled by the thickness of ancient stone walls. We settle into the quiet understanding that the greatest mysteries often begin not in darkness, but within the sunlit halls of academia, among those deemed merely eccentric. Our journey now focuses on the man himself, Professor Silas Thorne. His archive presents a portrait of striking wonder. He was not a traditional physicist, focused on the visible spectrum or the known electromagnetic forces. Thorne was obsessed with the unheard, with the deep, fundamental frequencies that modern industry had relegated to mere noise. He saw the world as a vast, resonant chamber. A feeling of gentle reflection guides us through his early academic papers. They detail his theories on acoustic physics, a field he essentially invented. While his peers explored the power of steam and electricity, Thorne pursued the power of vibration. He believed that energy was exchanged not just through collision or current, but through precise, low-frequency sound waves propagated through solid matter. There is a distinct air of nostalgia in viewing the few surviving photographs. Thorne appears tall, slightly stooped, with a formidable beard and eyes that seem perpetually fixed on a distant point beyond the frame. He looks less like a man of the bustling 1900s and more like a medieval alchemist, searching for the philosophical stone in the language of sound. He pursued a kind of oral metaphysics. Our curiosity is drawn to the label placed upon him by his colleagues, the eccentric. This label, preserved in the archives, is not a condemnation, but a gentle dismissal. It allowed the scientific community to ignore his radical claims without resorting to outright censure. They simply placed his genius outside the boundary of the useful. He taught at a respectable, but not preeminent, university. His lectures, we learn, were sparsely attended, focusing less on established theorems and more on the poetic notion that stone and steel held memory, and that this memory was communicated through constant, inaudible stress. Thorne's early sketches, meticulously preserved, show concepts for massive tuning forks and elaborate, ground-coupled microphones. They are the artifacts of a man attempting to give the invisible forces of the planet a voice. What is the dividing line between radical genius and dangerous obsession? For Thorne, it was the moment he shifted his focus from the natural world's resonance to the man-made world's hum. The sound of the city itself. His notes are filled with musings on the vibrational footprint of infrastructure. He calculated the low-frequency output of the great municipal water pumps, the underground railway tunnels, and the collective stress of millions of tons of architecture pressing down on the earth. He saw this collective load as a single, coherent acoustic signal. This shift defined his life's work. The city was not silent, it was roaring in a register too deep for human ears. A powerful sense of determination emanates from the records detailing his later life. Professor Thorne began to divert his modest inheritance and his university grants toward one singular goal: building an apparatus capable of receiving this colossal urban signal. He withdrew from social life, his letters growing fewer, his focus narrowing like a lens upon the microscopic world of sound. The archives hint at the frustration he faced. His requests for large grants were repeatedly denied. His designs were deemed too complex, too large, and entirely lacking in practical application. He was an embarrassment, a man chasing ghosts in the sound waves while the rest of the world chased industrial efficiency. A profound loneliness is suggested by the lack of collaborators. The complexity of his acoustic physics theory meant few could follow his mathematics. He relied on principles that treated sound not as a wave of pressure, but as a dense, structured medium, a kind of geological ether through which information flowed. His key theoretical concept was structural sympathy. He argued that when millions of individual loads, buildings, traffic, subways, were integrated into one geological footprint, they began to vibrate in sympathy, creating a compound, fundamental frequency. This frequency, he was convinced, was stable, powerful, and patterned. He writes, in a short, undated memo, about the nature of noise, we discard the deep hum as an artifact of machinery. But what if the artifact is the medium? What if the city is not making noise, but transmitting a constant, low-bandwidth message about its own structural integrity, its history, and its plan? What motivates a mind to seek validation not from peers, but from the inanimate material of the world itself? This is the core eccentricity of Silas Thorne. His notebooks from 1905 begin to focus relentlessly on the ULF band, ultra-low frequency. He understood that these waves travel enormous distances through the earth with minimal loss. They are the sounds of continents, tectonic plates, and the collective breathing of the planet. By focusing them into the city's structure, he sought to create a localized, intense data channel. This notion, that a city has a literal, physical voice speaking in a planetary dialect, is the magnificent hypothesis that set him apart and ultimately, set him on a dangerous, solitary path. The pursuit of acoustic physics was not just science, it was an attempt to eavesdrop on the architecture of reality. The transition in his notes from theoretical physics to practical engineering creates a sense of urgency. By 1906, Thorne stopped teaching. He liquidated assets and began the clandestine construction of his apparatus. This move signals a total break with. The final year, 1907, is marked by a frantic concentration. The archive contains no social records from this time. Thorne existed solely within the confines of his work, dedicated to installing and calibrating the colossal copper coil. We must picture the man, driven by a deep, singular focus, working in the constant, rhythmic dampness of the underground. There is a sense of genuine awe in reading his final academic scribbles. He was applying principles of Fourier analysis to geophysical data, a methodology that would not become standard for decades. He was processing the noise into structured, repeating wave patterns, searching for the grammatical rules of the hum. The physical toll of this work is subtly recorded. His handwriting, once meticulously precise, becomes looser, suggesting exhaustion. The isolation was near total. He was sacrificing his physical health for the chance to listen to the earth speak. His greatest triumph, glimpsed only in fragmented sentences, was achieving a stable resonance lock. He writes of the moment the massive coil finally synchronized perfectly with the city's ULF heartbeat, ceasing to be an instrument and becoming, instead, an organic extension of the city's acoustics. The most unnerving entry from this time poses a fundamental question: if the city is an organism, and I have found its voice, is it speaking about its past, its present, or its intention? This question marks the definitive shift from academic physics to something far more dangerous. To whom does the hidden knowledge of a city's core intention truly belong? The state, the builders, or the man who simply took the time to listen? Thorne believed that the longer the city existed, the clearer its fundamental plan would be encoded in the hum. He was no longer just measuring stress, he was measuring destiny. His ultimate fate, the tragic industrial accident, gains terrible irony when viewed against the backdrop of this magnificent, solitary pursuit. He was a man who tried to listen to the earth's secret language, and in doing so, encountered a truth that demanded to be silenced. Our final examination of Professor Thorne's profile is permeated with a quiet tragedy. He was a pioneer who ventured into a domain the rest of the world was not ready to acknowledge. His eccentricity was not a flaw, it was the necessary condition for his discovery. Only a mind outside the established boundaries could have conceived of acoustic physics on this scale. There is a sense of finality in the last dated entry, written just hours before his disappearance. It is not scientific, but purely observational. He writes, "The coil sings only one note now. It is the note of foundation, and within it, I hear the geometry of the unbuilt." This ultimate success was his undoing. He had translated the subterranean hum into something recognizable, a structure, a design, the unbuilt city. This knowledge, born of copper and theory, was too profound, too destabilizing to be allowed to persist. His final achievement was the perfect synthesis of his eccentric brilliance, connecting the deep, ancient physics of the earth to the immediate, practical reality of urban planning. He proved that the ground beneath our feet is not merely passive support, it is an active, resonant participant in the city's narrative. We conclude with a reflective question about legacy: does true scientific breakthrough require the inventor to pay the ultimate price? Or was Thorne's disappearance simply the inevitable consequence of reading a document, the resonant blueprint, that was never meant for human eyes? His story stands as a quiet warning: the most profound truths are often found not in the light of day, but in the deepest, unheard frequencies of the world around us, accessible only to those willing to embrace complete eccentricity. The archives now guide us toward the physical location of his triumph and his tragedy, the forgotten pumping station. The sheer scale of the apparatus required a clandestine laboratory, a place where the noise of the surface could not interfere with the deep, steady voice of the earth. The documents hint at the perfect site, a long-decommissioned sewer pumping station. We must now descend to understand the true nature of his chosen environment and the terrible irony of his final resting place. The soft texture of a leather-bound folio rests beneath the gentle, golden beam of a desk lamp. We open the intellectual gateway to the core of Professor Thorne's forgotten work, immersing ourselves in the serene, yet profound, concept of urban resonance. We begin with a sense of quiet wonder. Consider the enormous scale of a great metropolis, London, Paris, New York, not as a collection of streets and buildings, but as a single, massive, interlocked physical body. Thorne looked past the movement and the sound, focusing instead on the constant, colossal stress placed upon the earth. He believed that this aggregate load generated a unique, continuous vibration, that a feeling of gentle reflection guides us through his complex mathematical notations. He reasoned that every action in the city, a train passing beneath a structure, the tidal flow of the river, the simple act of millions of people walking, contributed tiny bursts of energy. These bursts, when averaged over the entire geographical area, did not cancel out. Instead, they coalesced into a stable, powerful, ultra-low frequency field. There is a sense of subtle nostalgia in this pursuit. It harks back to an era of holistic thinking, where science and philosophy were less divided. Thorne viewed the city not merely as engineered, but as an organic, geological entity, expressing its existence through this constant, deep subterranean hum. He treated the city as if it were a massive, slow-beating, structural heart. Our overriding curiosity compels us to understand the implications of this theory. If the city's presence creates a unique, powerful vibrational signature, what kind of information would that signature contain? It must be more than random noise, it must be a summary of its own structural existence. This, Thorne hypothesized, was the city's secret language. He documented his belief that this ULF vibration, this resonance, carried two things: the absolute current stress data, and, more profoundly, the original design intent. The language was static, derived from the unchanging arrangement of foundational supports, sewers, and deep tunnels laid down over centuries. We encounter his central, unsettling proposition: the material world, when organized on a colossal scale, begins to communicate. The structures speak to the earth, and the earth speaks back through resonance. Thorne simply built the receiver for this planetary conversation. What is the nature of truth when it is communicated not through human voice or print, but through the deep, inaudible shuddering of the material world? The theory suggests that the foundation of the city acts as a natural encryption key. To hear the message, one must understand the geometry of the load-bearing supports, the density of the bedrock, and the depth of the pilings. These factors, in combination, filter and encode the vibrational data into a structured pattern. This shift from studying sound to studying the syntax of vibration is the point where urban resonance becomes truly dangerous. He was attempting to translate the city's thoughts. A pervasive feeling of intellectual awe is provoked by the sheer scope of Thorne's thought experiment. He was applying principles of wave mechanics to concepts usually reserved for philosophy. He sought a universal grammar of stone and steel, a repeatable method to derive meaning from the city's structural noise. There is an element of isolation that colors this theory. Thorne found no peers willing to engage with the idea that the rhythmic rumble of the underground was a complex sentence. His theory required a total detachment from the human elements of the city, the politics, the culture, the commerce, and an immersion in its purely physical existence. His notebooks provide detailed analogies. He compared the foundational structure of the city to a massive, low-tension drum skin. Every impact, every load, created a disturbance. But the constant, recurring pattern of the city's life, the 24-hour cycle of peak and trough, created a stable, persistent fundamental tone. This tone, he believed, was the carrier frequency for the secret language. A growing sense of speculation accompanies our review of his hypothesized phonemes. They were not phonetic, they were geometric. A square pattern of foundational load might translate to a concept of stability or boundary, while a linear progression of stress, like a new railway line, might translate to intention or flow. He writes of the need to understand the deep history of the city, the hidden streams, the buried ruins, the forgotten geological faults. These ancient, foundational elements, though invisible, contribute their own persistent acoustic legacy to the modern hum. They are the older, heavier vowels in the city's resonant speech. How much of our current reality is subconsciously governed by the silent, vibrational legacy of the past, embedded in the very ground beneath our feet? Thorne was attempting to prove that the city was a historical document in constant broadcast. Every street, every sewer pipe, every load-bearing column was contributing to a continuous, self-referential narrative about its own enduring existence. The implications are staggering. If the physical structure is the language, then the city is not built, it is spoken into existence, and it continues to speak about its own ongoing self-definition. A feeling of discovery permeates the records detailing his breakthrough. Thorne moved from mapping the general hum to isolating the nonlinear components. He began filtering out the predictable daily cycles, traffic, work hours, to focus on the static, geometric vibrations of the foundational mass. This static component, he theorized, contained the core message. There is an element of danger inherent in this isolation. By stripping away the sound of human life, he was left with the sound of the deep, cold architecture, the sound of the permanent. He was listening to the city's bones, and what the bones said was detached from human concerns. His theory on the city's secret language held that the message was not descriptive, but prescriptive. It was not reporting what is, but asserting what must be according to the foundational laws of its structure. The vibrations were a continuous structural command, a self-optimizing directive. A powerful conviction sustained him through the months of data gathering. He began to draw schematic correlations between the vibrational patterns and known, yet seemingly disparate, physical locations, connecting, for instance, a stress point in an East London railway tunnel to a strange magnetic anomaly in a distant northern suburb. Thorne's notes from this phase include long, rambling paragraphs about the possibility of structural sentience. He questioned whether the urban resonance was merely a physical phenomenon, or if the sheer complexity of the organized mass had achieved a form of low-level, non-biological consciousness, a geological intelligence that if the city speaks, and we are built upon its language, are we not simply components of its continuing sentence? This is where the theory of urban resonance became less about physics and more about quiet, terrifying metaphysics. The city was not just a transmitter, it was a sovereign speaker. The next stage of his work, the translation itself, was born out of the absolute belief that this coherent ULF signature must yield a readable text, a foundational document written in the city's secret language. We now approach the most intense phase, captured by an air of frantic anticipation. Thorne was confident he had isolated the language's syntax and was now building the translation table. This table represented years of work, correlating minute vibrational shifts to geometric and conceptual meaning. A palpable sense of tension precedes the first successful transcription. He was preparing to read a text that, by his own theory, represented the fundamental, non-human intentions of his entire environment. The potential for contradiction, for finding a truth that shattered the perceived world, was absolute. Thorne's method involved layering different frequencies, separating the rhythmic, human signals, the daily life, from the structural signals, the foundational load. The secret language resided entirely in the latter, the deep, quiet articulation of stone on stone, of clay supporting concrete. His success, though short-lived, was a moment of supreme triumph. He writes of the moment the patterns resolved, transforming from meaningless noise into recognizable, recurring forms. The hum was speaking in sentences constructed of load vectors and geological density. He transcribed the text not onto paper, but onto a vast, physical map. The data points, when laid over London's known geography, began to outline streets and buildings that were not there. This was the moment the theory of urban resonance yielded its most terrifying fruit, the unbuilt city. What knowledge is so destabilizing that it requires the erasure of the scientist, the instrument, and the very concept itself? The resulting map was the prescriptive text of the city, the hidden plan that ran parallel to human development. It was the blueprint encoded within the resonant frequency. This discovery revealed the true depth of the city's secret language. It wasn't merely speaking about itself, it was articulating an alternate, active reality, hidden in the constant, inaudible hum. Beneath the pavement, the final notes on the theory of urban resonance are tinged with profound fear. Thorne realized that the secret language was articulating a structural pattern that seemed to be correcting or overriding the known city. The unbuilt city was gaining clarity in the resonance, as if preparing for physical manifestation. This realization creates a deep sense of suspicion about the city's long-term history. Had this alternate plan been articulating itself in the ULF band for centuries? Were all great cities broadcasting their own secret, shadow plans? The greatest threat of his theory was its anonymity. The message did not come from a person or a known agency, it came from the resonance itself. This meant the hidden structure was fundamentally autonomous, guided by its own geological and architectural laws. A powerful feeling of quiet paranoia emerges. If the city speaks, and its language describes an alternate structural reality, then the human reality we inhabit may be secondary, merely a noise overlaying the true, profound statement of the stone. We conclude our reflection on the man and his theory with the chilling understanding that Thorne's eccentricity allowed him to hear the unhearable, leading him to a truth that was not meant for human consumption. He attempted to translate the city's secret language, and the consequence was immediate, total silence. What happens when an engineer translates a structural command from a non-human entity that supersedes the human architectural will? The theory of urban resonance remains a powerful, destabilizing concept, a reminder that under the daily cacophony, the deep, constant hum of the earth and the structure holds a permanent, coded message. The archives now guide us to the place where this communication was intercepted, the subterranean nexus that briefly gave voice to the world's secret thoughts. The massive apparatus Thorne needed required isolation, darkness, and proximity to the city's deep infrastructure. The logical, terrifying choice was a defunct sewer pumping station. We must now venture into the archives detailing this forgotten space to understand the true isolation of his final months. The faint moonlight, filtered through the thick glass of a high, dusty window, casts long, still shadows across the archival room. We are now descending, not into the pages of a book, but into the forgotten infrastructure of the past, to the location of Professor Thorne's final, solitary work. Our initial emotion is one of profound wonder. Think of the vast, intricate network of tunnels and conduits that lie hidden beneath the familiar surfaces of the city. The pumping station, specifically the decommissioned station known only by its municipal designation, G14, was a deep, complex node within this network. It was a space designed for immense mechanical power, now reduced to silent, cavernous emptiness. A sense of quiet reflection settles upon us as we review the archival blueprints. They depict subterranean chambers of colossal size, originally housing steam-driven pumps meant to move millions of gallons of waste. The height of the brick vaults, the sheer scale of the engineering, it speaks to the industrial ambition of the Victorian era, now surrendered to the silent damp. There is a powerful nostalgia attached to these industrial ruins. They represent a discarded solution, a monumental effort superseded by newer technology. For Professor Thorne, however, this obsolescence was its primary advantage. The noise of its former function had vanished, leaving only the pure, unfiltered sound of the earth and the deep, structural hum of the city above. Our overriding curiosity focuses on the geography. Why this location, specifically? Thorne required absolute isolation from surface noise and maximum proximity to the city's foundational load. The G14 station sat directly over a major intersection of deep geological faults and crucial infrastructural arteries. A nexus perfect for capturing the resonant frequency. The station was not a simple basement, it was a true labyrinth beneath the pavement. Multiple levels of brick and concrete stretched far deeper than any standard foundation, originally built to resist the immense hydraulic pressure of the sewage system. This depth provided the perfect acoustic dampening chamber for his delicate copper coil. Thorne's own journal contains a lyrical description of the space, referring to it as the city's ear canal. He realized that in the darkness, devoid of human activity, the primary sound source was the ULF vibration transmitted through the surrounding material. What drives an academic to trade the sunlit lecture halls of a university for the constant, cold dampness of the subterranean world? It is the belief that the purest form of truth is found only in the deepest isolation. The silence of the decommissioned station was a deceptive thing. It was not empty of sound, it was merely empty of human sound. It was filled with the non-human acoustic reality, the deep, geologic breathing and the urban resonance he sought to translate. The vast, echoing space provided the necessary scale for the apparatus, a massive copper coil that required the dimensions of a small chapel. A sense of structural awe is evoked by the engineering of the station's deep shafts. They were sunk through layers of London clay and ballast, placing Thorne's laboratory in intimate contact with the geological substrata. This immediate, physical connection to the deep earth was vital for the acoustic physics he practiced. There is an element of intense focus required to imagine the environment. The only light would have been the golden, flickering intensity of oil lamps and later, temporary electric work lamps, casting dramatic, dancing shadows on the vaulted ceilings and the huge, empty pits where the pumps once sat. A quiet solitude permeates the archived notes from his time here. He worked alone, his only companion the immense, coiled machinery he was building. The isolation was necessary to prevent stray magnetic or vibrational interference from corrupting the highly sensitive data he was attempting to collect from the subterranean hum. The sheer scale of the space was instrumental to his experiment. The labyrinth beneath the pavement acted as its own acoustic resonator, magnifying the low-frequency vibrations that traveled through the bedrock, concentrating the city's hum into a localized, powerful signal. Thorne's sketches reveal how he utilized the existing pump foundations, massive blocks of concrete and stone, as acoustic coupling points. He essentially wired the entire structure of the pumping station into his experiment, turning the abandoned chamber into a colossal receiving antenna. What does it feel like to be the only listener in a space that is amplifying the deep, non-human language of the world? The experience must have been profoundly humbling and terrifying. The cold, persistent dampness of the station was also a factor. The atmosphere was stable, preventing the thermal expansion and contraction that could introduce noise into his sensitive measurements. It was a perfect, sealed environment, a vault for the city's secrets. This forgotten industrial ruin became, for a brief, critical period in 1907, the most important listening post in the city, positioned perfectly at the nexus of the urban resonance. A feeling of intense commitment emerges when we consider the logistical challenge. The professor had to secretly move tons of equipment, the copper wire, the custom cores, the recording devices, into this deep, inconspicuous location. This required significant planning and silent, late-night labor, hinting at an early awareness of the need for secrecy. There is a sense of creeping paranoia that begins to shade his later notes from the pumping station. He writes of the sudden, unexplained echo effects and the unsettling consistency of the stations. Internal resonance, independent of the external city's schedule. He wondered if the chamber itself was amplifying something more than just the ULF wave. The atmosphere was one of profound alienation. Though directly beneath a bustling metropolitan area, the labyrinth beneath the pavement felt like a separate world, disconnected by layers of earth and brick. Thorne was experiencing the city from the perspective of its foundations, cold, permanent, and indifferent to the ephemeral lives on the surface. The archival records show that the station's main access shaft was notoriously difficult to use, requiring complex hoisting equipment, a perfect natural defense against casual intrusion, but also a dangerous obstacle in the event of an emergency. The environment was physically and psychologically taxing. Thorne's dedication to this subterranean world implies a willing rejection of the surface reality. He was convinced that the true reality, the city's secret language, resided in the deep. How much of a man's final fate is dictated by the environment he chooses to inhabit? Was the pumping station merely a laboratory, or did its pervasive darkness and cold eventually consume the scientist? He began to view the colossal, inert iron pipes and empty pump pits as structural archives, repositories of past sounds and pressures, which contributed their own ancient vibrational history to his measurements. The pumping station was not just receiving the hum, it was editing it with its own acoustic memory. This blurring of the lines between the coil, the station, and the city is where the physics gave way to the unsettling metaphysics of urban resonance that we feel a sense of intense, almost breathless calm as we approach the description of the coil's successful activation. The professor describes the moment the apparatus achieved stable resonance lock within the pumping station, the point at which the internal sound of the coil harmonized perfectly with the external subterranean hum. There is an element of rapture in his notes. The station, once a dark, damp void, was briefly transformed into a place of supreme, focused power. The entire labyrinth was vibrating at the city's fundamental frequency, an immense, invisible hum that filled the chambers. A feeling of deep satisfaction precedes the final catastrophe. Thorne had succeeded in creating the perfect acoustic environment, the ideal antenna. The pumping station served its final, unintended purpose, to capture and concentrate the city's secret language. The architectural details of the station's reinforced walls suggest a perverse irony. They were built to contain hydraulic pressure, but they ended up containing a truth so immense it could not be released. The station was a vault, securing both the experiment and its subsequent, fatal discovery. He writes of the quality of the air in the station after the coil was active, a sense of pressure and density, as if the very atmosphere was charged with the weight of the city's thoughts. He was working inside a gigantic, active receiver, fully immersed in the translated data. When does the environment cease to be a tool for the scientist and begin to act as a silent, powerful influence on the man himself? The total isolation of the labyrinth beneath the pavement meant that when Thorne finally achieved the translation of the Unbuilt City, there was no one to verify, no one to share, and no one to stop the forces that converged to silence him. The stillness of the pumping station was not a promise of peace, it was the chilling silence before the truth was revealed, a truth so profound it triggered an immediate, powerful physical response from the forces guarding the urban resonance. Our final thoughts on the pumping station are suffused with a sense of lingering foreboding. We know that within days of achieving success, the station became the site of a government-backed, unauthorized demolition. The massive brick vaults, designed to withstand immense pressure, were systematically destroyed from within. There is a final, cold irony here. The pumping station's greatest strength, its subterranean depth and isolation, made the erasure of the evidence simple and absolute. No curious eyes could witness the strange, rapid work taking place deep beneath the pavement. A feeling of intense vulnerability accompanies the realization that this powerful, secret location was so easily targeted and obliterated. The forces that controlled the urban resonance knew exactly where to strike to silence the one man who had listened too closely. The pumping station, the perfect laboratory, became the perfect grave. It now exists only as a geological anomaly, a highly compressed pocket of destroyed brick and shattered copper, buried deep beneath the city's indifference. The most unsettling thought remains: the destruction was aimed not just at the coil, but at the space itself, eliminating the resonant environment that allowed the interception to occur. Did the demolition crews fear the continued operation of the coil, or did they fear the power of the empty space to amplify the secret language even after the machine was gone? The pumping station, a labyrinth beneath the pavement, is no longer a location, it is a symbol of total, enforced archival silence, a black hole in the city's physical and historical record. We now ascend from the depths, guided by the paper trail of the event that followed the silence. The massive effort required to demolish the station immediately after Thorne's vanishing left telltale signs in the bureaucratic record. We must now turn our attention to the immediate aftermath, specifically the water-damaged police report, the sole piece of evidence that suggests the disappearance was not an accident, but a highly coordinated, violent cleanup. The warm scent of aged paper and dried wax hangs still in the air, illuminated by the steady, golden light that defines this archive. We hold now the most intimate, yet most terrifying, relic of Professor Silas Thorne's disappearance, the final letter. Our first emotion is one of gentle wonder at the object itself. It is addressed to Henrietta, his fiancée, postmarked but never mailed, found in the lining of his coat when the authorities inventoried his possessions. It is a desperate, hurried farewell disguised as an ordinary correspondence, written not in the language of science, but in the language of a frightened, yet resolute heart. A feeling of quiet reflection guides us through the familiar script. The opening lines are mundane, assurances of health, apologies for missed appointments. This normalization, this conscious attempt at routine, underscores the tremendous internal chaos Thorne must have been experiencing. He was trying to construct a thin shield of normalcy against an overwhelming, terrifying truth. There is a profound nostalgia for the intimacy of the moment it captures. This letter represents his final, conscious connection to the human world before he surrendered fully to the subterranean resonance. Every casual phrase, every expression of affection, carries the weight of a man saying goodbye to a life he knew he could no longer keep. Our overriding curiosity compels us toward the second half of the letter. The tone shifts abruptly from domestic reassurance to cryptic, urgent warning. It is here that the professional scientist and the desperate man collide, using personal terms to describe an existential crisis. He details his success, not in cold physics, but in a burst of excited, unpunctuated prose. He confesses that the copper coil has achieved not just reception, but a translation lock on the city's fundamental hum. He tells Henrietta, his trusted confidant, that the music of the earth has resolved into a text. He describes the translation table in vague terms, speaking of geometries and pressures instead of words. He knew he could not write the full truth, but he desperately needed one person to hold the key to his final discovery. What drives a mind to share a truth that is fundamentally dangerous to the recipient? Is it love, or is it the primal need to ensure that the terrible knowledge does not perish with the discoverer? The central, most chilling concept is introduced through a physical description. The translated text, when plotted onto a map, describes not London, but a second city overlaid onto the existing structure. He refers to it as the ghost design, the permanent geometry. This description sets the stage for the letter's final, devastating sentence.
A powerful sense of quiet dread settles over the single page as we approach the final paragraph. Thorne drops the pretense of normalcy entirely. His handwriting, previously neat, now slopes sharply and is pressed deeply into the paper, revealing the hand's tension. There is an element of intense, chilling clarity in his final scientific thought. He realized that the urban resonance was not merely descriptive of the existing city, it was prescriptive of the unbuilt one. He writes that the shadow city was not a relic, but a constantly updating, active structural command. A profound vulnerability is exposed in his admission that he now feels watched by the very structure of the city. He realized that by translating the hum, he had made himself visible to the autonomous, resonant intelligence of the physical world. He was no longer an observer, but an intruder. His explanation for the necessity of his sudden disappearance is vague, yet desperate. He claims he cannot risk Henrietta's safety by attempting a conventional departure. This suggests a perceived threat that was immediate, pervasive, and utterly beyond the capabilities of conventional law or protection. He writes, in a short, fragmented line, "The design is not resting. It is compiling itself." This implies that the ghost plan, powered by the continuous resonance, was moving towards self-manifestation, and he had stumbled upon the final stage of its construction. If a scientist is presented with a truth that could shatter the structural reality of his world, is it cowardice to flee, or is it a duty to preserve the knowledge outside the sphere of immediate danger? The entire purpose of the letter shifts from a personal note to an archival record, a single document meant to survive the impending erasure. He was entrusting the truth not to the Academy, but to the single person he believed would keep it safe, yet would not pursue it. All of this profound personal and scientific terror culminates in the letter's closing sentence: "The reason this document survived the Great Silence." We now isolate the most critical archival phrase, approaching it with clinical intensity. It is scrawled beneath his hurried signature, almost an afterthought, yet bearing the weight of ultimate certainty. The phrase itself is, "A second plan is now active." A feeling of cold precision is conveyed by the language. The use of "plan" is deliberate, suggesting intent and design. The phrase, "is now active," uses the present continuous tense, emphasizing not a future threat, but an immediate, ongoing event. The profound unsettlement of this statement lies in its lack of attribution. Who, or what, activated the second plan? Was it a human agent, a secret government body that learned of his discovery? Or was it the autonomous, structural intelligence of the city itself, completing a threshold of self-assembly? The archive suggests the latter is the more terrifying conclusion. The theory of urban resonance reached a critical mass, and the city's hidden design initiated its own activation protocol, independent of any human direction. This sentence is the professor's final attempt to articulate a truth that transcended human conspiracy. He realized that the threat was not from men, but from the physics of the metropolis itself, a quiet, geological inevitability. When the built world begins to speak of its own separate, competing intentions, how can the human inhabitants ever truly trust the ground they walk on? The sentence acts as a structural timestamp. It pinpoints the precise moment that the unbuilt city ceased to be a potentiality and became an active, competing reality in the vibrational spectrum. This activation triggered Thorne's own vanishing. The letter, thus, is not a communication, it is a final alarm bell, set off at the very moment the danger became unavoidable. The circumstances of the letter's discovery provoke a sense of quiet suspicion. Why was it found in the lining of his coat pocket, stamped and ready, yet unsent? The logical conclusion is that Thorne was intercepted, either physically or mentally, in the final moments before he could reach the post box. There is an element of tragic irony here. The professor, who meticulously planned his departure and his archival legacy, was cut off by an event that was quicker, cleaner, and more decisive than his own intentions. A subtle tension underlies the analysis of the letter's seal. It was not tampered with, suggesting that the initial searchers, presumably the official authorities, were either unaware of its significance or deliberately allowed it to pass into the inventory as a trivial personal item, misjudging its content. This oversight is the single, crucial error in the cover-up. It is the flaw that allowed the truth of the second plan to leak from the protected vault of the pumping station and into the private archive of his fiancée. The true impact of the letter is psychological. It reframes the professor's disappearance from a simple industrial tragedy into an act of necessary erasure. The content of the final sentence provided the justification for the immediate, total demolition of his laboratory. What level of power is capable of moving faster and with greater secrecy than a personal letter sent in 1907 London? The final letter is, ultimately, a vessel for a single, terrifying concept, the moment the inanimate world declares its own independence. Thorne's last act was to try and warn the surface world that the deep structure was now operating under its own directives. The stillness and calm of the archived letter contrast violently with the profound panic and urgency that led to its writing. We conclude our examination with a pervasive feeling of quiet vulnerability. The final letter, despite its survival, did not stop the plan. It merely provided the archival evidence that the plan had indeed begun. The second plan is now 120 years older, constantly refining its structural commands within the urban resonance. There is a final, cold solace in the letter's existence. It confirms Thorne's sanity and the validity of his theory. It assures us that his disappearance was not accidental but was the direct, physical consequence of hearing the city's secret language and attempting to expose its ultimate intention. A subtle awe remains for the professor's final, archival choice. He chose the most personal, most easily overlooked medium, a love letter, to carry the most catastrophic scientific truth. This decision ensured its survival when volumes of official notes would have been instantly incinerated. The ultimate significance of the phrase, "a second plan is now active," lies in the implied continuity. The plan is not an archive itself, it is a live function. And it runs without its designer, powered by the continuous, deep hum of the city's foundations. The final, reflective question we carry forward is this: if the second plan has been running actively since 1907, what is the extent of its progress today, and when will the quiet, resonant infrastructure finally manifest into the visible world? The final letter remains a fragile yet permanent piece of evidence, marking the precise boundary between known history and the unsettling truth of the unbuilt city. The letter's content, detailing the activation of the plan, necessitated the immediate destruction of the evidence. We must now turn to the fragments that record this cleanup, specifically the water-damaged police report, the only document that contradicts the official story of the tragic accident and confirms the subsequent unauthorized demolition. The silence here is absolute, broken only by the gentle weight of a heavy, leather-bound volume being placed carefully upon the archival table. We open the pages of the public truth, the authorized narrative, the official record. Our first emotion is one of cold wonder at the simplicity of the lie. The official report regarding Professor Silas Thorne's disappearance is brief, clinical, and entirely lacking in the complexity that defined his life. It speaks of a date, a time, and a location, the decommissioned pumping station G14, and reduces his profound scientific pursuit to a singular, easily dismissible phrase. A feeling of quiet reflection guides us through the bureaucratic language. The documents are stamped with official seals and signed by minor functionaries. They detail the cause of death as accidental drowning due to structural failure within an abandoned municipal installation. The focus is on the failure of the environment, not the action of the man. There is a powerful nostalgia for the clarity of the pre-conspiracy world this document attempts to maintain. It is a world where tragic events are neatly catalogued, and unexplained disappearances are safely confined to the realm of human error or unfortunate circumstance. This simplicity offers a kind of false comfort, a clean narrative quickly constructed to prevent public unease. Our overriding curiosity compels us to scrutinize the inconsistencies. The report claims structural failure. But the pumping station was renowned for its immense, over-engineered brickwork, built to withstand tremendous hydraulic stress. The notion that it collapsed spontaneously is, to anyone familiar with Victorian engineering, deeply improbable. The official record states that no body was recovered, attributing this to the swift rush of sewage and groundwater through the alleged breach. This detail conveniently seals the narrative, allowing for closure without the need for a physical examination of the location or the remains. This document is not a record of fact, it is a declaration of administrative reality. It forces the human world to accept a simple, tragic outcome, thereby neutralizing any possible public interest in the professor's controversial theories. What drives the powerful machinery of the state to mobilize with such speed and precision to enforce a lie of omission? Is it fear of the truth, or merely the bureaucratic instinct to maintain order? The report omits any mention of the copper coil, the massive electronic apparatus that occupied the heart of the station. It makes no reference to the tons of metal, wiring, and custom-built machinery that would have been crushed by the supposed collapse. This archival void is, in itself, the greatest piece of evidence. The official truth here is a weapon of quiet public control, ensuring that the urban resonance remains an unheard secret. A sense of pervasive skepticism settles in as we analyze the timeline. The report states the accident occurred within hours of Professor Thorne's final, desperate writing of the final letter, the letter claiming a second plan is now active. This temporal proximity is impossible to ignore. There is an element of bureaucratic speed that seems unnatural for a standard industrial fatality. The final report was filed, approved, and officially closed within 72 hours. Such efficiency suggests pre-arranged protocols, activated not by an accident, but by a known event, the moment the secret language was successfully translated. A quiet contempt for the official disregard of the professor's reputation is warranted. Thorne was a known, if eccentric, figure. Yet the report treats him as an anonymous laborer, a victim of common hazard. There is no mention of his academic pursuits, his theories on acoustic physics, or the advanced nature of his equipment. The record emphasizes that the incident occurred in an abandoned area, thereby shifting responsibility away from any active municipal department. This carefully chosen phrasing isolates the event, preventing any wider investigation into who, precisely, had access to the labyrinth beneath the pavement. The true function of the official record was to provide a legal and social terminus to the problem of Professor Thorne. Once designated an accidental drowning, no further inquiry was necessary, and the true cause of his vanishing, the theory of urban resonance, was safely buried along with the site. When the machinery of government works seamlessly to conceal a truth, where does the individual turn to file the counterclaim? The archive becomes the only court of appeal. The report states that the site was subsequently sealed to prevent further injury. This benign term conceals the massive, unauthorized demolition that actually occurred, turning the site into an unrecoverable tomb. This official narrative is a perfect, clinical silence, designed to mask the violence of the event it purports to explain. A growing sense of intellectual indignation is provoked by the sheer audacity of the cover-up. The authorities, in crafting the official record, were forced to ignore every physical reality of the site, the immense strength of the brickwork, the absence of prior stress fractures, and the fact that the station had been completely dry for years. There is an element of necessary deception inherent in the record structure. It uses vague, scientifically plausible terms, structural failure, hydraulic surge, to mask what was likely a fast, targeted, and powerful physical intervention designed to destroy the coil and the data it contained. A feeling of profound loss surrounds the omission of Thorne's life's work. By dismissing his death as accidental, the world lost not just a man, but the chance to understand the deepest truth he had uncovered, the existence of the unbuilt city. The record ensures that his final act of discovery is erased from the historical narrative. The public silence that followed the report was absolute. No dissenting voices from the university, no follow-up inquiries from the press. The story was consumed quickly by the daily noise of the city, leaving only a faint echo in the most obscure municipal documents. The efficiency of this archival suppression speaks to a highly organized, powerful, and likely non-municipal entity guiding the process. The simplicity of the narrative suggests a cold, rational assessment. A complex lie takes too long to maintain, but a simple, dismissible tragedy is accepted immediately. If the most significant discovery of the age is instantly classified as a non-event, what value does the official historical record truly hold? It is revealed to be a tool, not a mirror. The very typeface and formatting of the official report, dry, standardized, and impersonal, contribute to the hypnotic effect of the lie. It presents the cover-up as an inescapable, bureaucratic fact, soothing public suspicion with the dullness of its presentation. Microhook, 1,500 words past. This document is the official seal on the conspiracy, converting profound mystery into mundane tragedy. We feel a quiet, simmering anger at the finality of the verdict, death by tragic industrial accident. This verdict required the complicity of multiple agencies, the police, the municipal works, and the health authority, all agreeing to a narrative that contradicted the known state of the pumping station. There is an element of necessary corruption in the records. Someone, or multiple people, must have signed off on the false structural assessment, overlooking the physical impossibility of a spontaneous collapse in such a heavily engineered site. A profound sense of injustice permeates the subtext. Thorne, who was attempting to serve the truth of the city's structure, was himself destroyed and then administratively erased by the very forces that benefit from the silence, the guardians of the established reality. The official record, devoid of any emotional content, achieves a chilling, clinical effect. It denies Thorne even the dignity of a meaningful end, reducing his final, terrifying moments of discovery to a simple statistical loss. We reflect on the power of the unsaid. The document speaks loudly through its omissions: the missing copper coil, the missing witness reports, the missing stress analysis. These blank spaces are the true archival evidence of the coordinated suppression. What is the weight of a single, human truth against the vast, impersonal force of a coordinated government lie? It is easily crushed, reduced to a single line in a forgotten ledger. The acceptance of the official record by the public ensured that the urban resonance could continue its work undisturbed. The city's second plan was safe, protected by the lie that concealed its brief moment of articulation. The report is the archival monument to the total victory of the unseen power over the singular, fragile human truth. Our final focus on the official record is informed by a sense of quiet distrust. We understand that this narrative is the deliberate construction of the entity that felt threatened by Thorne's success. It is the voice of the conspiracy itself, speaking through the sterile language of bureaucracy. There is a final, cold irony in the title: accidental drowning. Thorne was not drowned by water, but by the overwhelming, silent pressure of the truth he had unearthed. He was drowned in the subterranean hum that articulated the unbuilt city. A feeling of enduring vigilance is necessary. This document teaches us that in the archives of power, the most important truth is found not in what is written, but in what is rigorously, deliberately excluded. The record successfully closed the case for the world above ground. But the archival thread, though fragile, remains. The inconsistencies of the official report lead us directly to the single surviving document that contradicts it. We conclude by considering the vulnerability of memory against the authority of paper. The official record attempted to replace human memory with administrative fact, forcing the world to forget the brilliant eccentricity of Professor Silas Thorne in favor of a convenient, common tragedy. When a lie is officially sanctioned and archived, how does one ever hope to resurrect the actual events that were violently suppressed? The very existence of this clean, cold document is the proof of the conspiracy, the archival footprint of the force that ensured the second plan would remain active and unseen. The official record is the quiet, final triumph of silence over sound. The massive, systemic lie of the official report left behind one crucial, fragile trace of the actual events: a heavily water-damaged police report supplement. This document, filed by a junior, quickly transferred inspector, contradicts the final verdict and speaks of unauthorized demolition crews. We must now turn our attention to the one piece of paper that dared to tell a different story. The amber glow of a solitary lamp catches the texture of a document that has survived against all odds. We now approach the fracture point in the official narrative, seeking the truth not in pristine ledgers, but in the fragile defiance of the classified find. Our first emotion is one of profound wonder at the document's mere existence. Dated 1910, 3 years after Professor Thorne's disappearance, this paper is a supplement, filed separately from the main official record, suggesting it was always intended for compartmentalization or immediate destruction. It is a ghost document, created long after the case was officially closed. A feeling of quiet reflection settles as we examine its condition. The paper is heavily stained, marked by the persistent intrusion of dampness and mold, testament to years spent in a dark, forgotten corner of an archive. The water damage has bleached and blurred some sections, yet the crucial handwritten text remains stubbornly legible, preserved by a quality of ink stronger than the municipal filing system. There is a powerful nostalgia for the integrity of the lone human voice it represents. This supplement was filed by a young police inspector, a man whose name was quickly erased from the city's active service, suggesting his meticulous notes were his professional undoing. It is the voice of a man who refused to align his observations with the imposed lie. Our overriding curiosity compels us to focus on the contradiction. The official record declared an accidental drowning and structural failure in 1907. This supplement, however, records observations made in 1908, detailing strange, unauthorized activity at the sealed pumping station site months after the supposed tragedy. The title of the document is chillingly simple: Observation Log, G14 Site, Additional Notes. It functions as a whisper of defiance against the orchestrated silence, providing the only extant contradiction to the official pronouncement of the tragic industrial accident. This piece of paper represents the archival equivalent of a flaw in stone, a tiny crack through which a flood of truth can escape. It proves that the cover-up was not instant, but an ongoing, messy process, leaving vulnerable, human points of failure. What intellectual conviction forces a minor official to risk his career by documenting a truth that his superiors have already officially buried? It suggests a moral refusal to participate in the historical lie. The handwriting is precise, clean, and professional, contrasting sharply with the chaotic damage of the water. The inspector meticulously documented dates, times, and the make of unauthorized vehicles seen entering the sealed site. This document is the physical proof that the truth of the urban resonance could not be entirely contained by the bureaucratic machinery. A growing sense of quiet suspicion permeates the text as we analyze the entries regarding the unauthorized activity. The inspector reports noticing a consistent stream of activity, not municipal repair crews, but specialized workers wearing dark, unmarked uniforms, entering the sealed pumping station site late at night. There is an element of bureaucratic speed in the subsequent events that catches our attention. The inspector's notes grow frantic in their attempt to seek clarification from his superiors, asking why a supposedly drowned and sealed site requires clandestine nocturnal labor. His requests were met with silence, and then, a quick, compulsory transfer. A powerful feeling of vulnerability surrounds this document. It was clearly secreted away, filed not in the main case folder, but perhaps in a personal effects box or an overlooked departmental misfile, saving it from the official shredding that must have claimed all other contradictory evidence. The water damage itself, ironically, acted as a kind of archival protector. Its staining and fragility made the document unattractive to casual review, ensuring its survival in the deep, undisturbed oblivion of the archive's dampest recesses. The true significance of the supplement is its timeline. By documenting the activity after the supposed accident, the inspector inadvertently chronicled the cleanup operation. The organized effort to destroy Professor Thorne's copper coil and the evidence of the unbuilt city. How often in history is the true story found, not in the triumphant central narrative, but in the marginalized, fragile footnotes written by those on the periphery? The inspector's notes detail the sound emanating from the site, not the rushing of groundwater, but the rhythmic, muffled thud of heavy machinery and the distant percussion of explosions from deep underground. This observation directly invalidates the structural failure narrative. This small, water-damaged police supplement confirms that Professor Thorne's final moments were not a tragedy, but a highly coordinated execution of silence. A sense of deep inquiry forces us to focus on the demolition. The inspector's notes describe the final, conclusive event, the unauthorized demolition of the pumping station interior. He notes that the crew spent days systematically destroying the deep foundation blocks, the very elements Thorne used as acoustic couplers for the urban resonance. There is an element of chilling purpose in the destruction. The goal was not merely to seal the site, but to eliminate the resonant environment, to crush the coil and, crucially, to destroy the geological integrity of the acoustic antenna. A quiet, profound apprehension accompanies the realization of what the unauthorized crew feared most. They were not just recovering equipment, they were sanitizing a location that had briefly allowed the secret language to be heard. They feared the potential of the empty space to resonate again. The supplement notes that the demolition crew wore no identifying badges and moved under the direct cover of official darkness, suggesting a military or classified intelligence operation operating entirely outside municipal oversight. The inspector's quiet struggle is our own. He attempted to use the official bureaucratic channels, the requests for clarification, the detailed logging of license plates, to fight a conspiracy that operated above and beneath the civil service. What immense power is capable of mobilizing a secret demolition operation in the heart of a major city without leaving a single trace in the public record, save for this single, water-stained document? The importance of the water-damaged police supplement lies in its unassailable date. It was written in 1910, a full 2 years after the case was supposedly closed, confirming that the forces guarding the unbuilt city were still working actively to manage the silence. Microhook, 1,500 words past. This fragile piece of paper is the archival blueprint of the conspiracy, revealing the mechanics of the lie. A feeling of intellectual vindication arises from the document's validation of Professor Thorne's fears. He was not mad, he was silenced. The classified find confirms that his discovery of the second plan was real enough to provoke an immediate, violent, and sustained response from the hidden authorities. There is an element of quiet, bureaucratic horror captured here. The inspector was essentially documenting the commission of a crime, the illegal use of demolition explosives on sealed public property, a crime that went completely unpunished and unacknowledged. A profound respect is due to the anonymous inspector. He knew the danger of his notes, yet he preserved them. The water damage that marred the paper likely came from years of neglect in a damp storage facility, a fitting metaphor for the deliberate suppression of the truth. The fact that the document survived into the modern archive allows us to perform the archival reversal, using the proof of the cleanup to reconstruct the reality of the event. The demolition did not cause the accident was faked to allow the demolition. We reflect on the power of the marginalized document. The truth often exists not in the authorized, bound volumes of history, but in the fragile fragments that the censors considered too trivial or too damaged to bother retrieving. If a government can erase the physical reality of a site and the documentation of its erasure, what guarantee do we have that the established historical record is not merely a curated sequence of convenient lies? The water-damaged police supplement is the defiant echo against the official roar of silence, a tiny crack in the dam of historical deception. Its very fragility emphasizes the precarious nature of hidden truth. Our final moments with the classified find are charged with a sense of enduring responsibility. The survival of this single, damaged page places the burden of truth upon us. We must now read the silence and the water stains as carefully as the legible text. There is a final, cold solace in the document's physical state. It is a testament to the persistence of the material world. The ink, the paper, and the water damage itself all bear witness to the effort made to silence Professor Thorne and the urban residents. A sense of quiet closure is achieved not through answers, but through verification. This document confirms the existence of the conspiracy, validating the cryptic warning in the final letter that a second plan is now active. The heavily water-damaged police supplement is the final, essential piece of the archival puzzle. The smoking gun that proves the tragic industrial accident was an absolute lie, and that the city's hidden infrastructure was, and likely remains, guarded by forces willing to destroy both evidence and observers. We conclude by acknowledging the quiet heroism of the anonymous inspector. He knew the risk, yet he created a record that would ultimately survive his superiors' attempts at total control, allowing the truth to surface over a century later. When faced with an impossible cover-up, is the quiet act of meticulous documentation the only true form of resistance? The classified find ensures that the official silence can never be truly. The aim of the unofficial demolition was to destroy the unique acoustic environment that allowed the secret language to be heard. They sought to not only crush the machine but to structurally silence the pumping station, ensuring it could never again function as an antenna for the city's hum. We encounter the chilling reality that the force capable of organizing this operation valued the suppression of the theory of urban resonance more than the avoidance of a clear, prosecutable crime, the illegal use of explosives and the destruction of public property. What level of fear must a scientific truth inspire to justify such a risky, violent, and absolute act of archival erasure? The water-damaged supplement records the inspector's attempt to identify the demolition crew leader. He noted a single, large, stylized M on the side of one of the unmarked vehicles, an insignia he could not trace to any known civil engineering firm or government department. This simple, unidentified mark is the only physical clue to who erased the evidence. A sense of pervasive secrecy is created by the inspector's notes regarding the hours of operation. The crews worked exclusively between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., operating under the absolute cover of urban darkness, minimizing both traffic and witnesses. There is an element of grim efficiency in the records of the destruction. The muffled detonations were not random, they were surgically precise, aimed at the load-bearing supports that stabilized the professor's apparatus, turning the massive brick vaults into a controlled, internal collapse. A powerful feeling of isolation settles upon us. The public above ground, asleep in their homes, remained utterly unaware that a violent, targeted act of archival suppression was occurring directly beneath their feet, dismantling the evidence of their city's deepest secret. The unofficial demolition was a physical act of censorship, replacing the vibrant scientific reality of the copper coil with a compressed, irretrievable void of rubble and fractured stone, ensuring the subterranean hum could not be intercepted again. The operation suggests that the entity behind it possessed deep, insider knowledge of the pumping station's blueprints and Thorne's internal setup. They knew exactly where the coil was positioned and which structural supports needed to be destroyed to achieve total, unrecoverable burial. If the forces of suppression move with such speed and surgical knowledge, how can any lone researcher hope to maintain the safety of his or her own classified discoveries? The demolition was not just about hiding the machine, it was about destroying the concept. By physically erasing the resonant environment, they attempted to prove that the theory of urban resonance was an architectural impossibility, thus reinforcing the official record's lie. Microhook, 1,000 words past. The question of who erased the evidence leads us to seek an entity powerful enough to command both physical infrastructure and bureaucratic silence. A sense of intellectual analysis focuses our attention on the financial mechanisms. The sheer cost of this operation, the explosives, the transport, the specialized labor, the bribes, and the resulting administrative silence, must have been immense. This points away from a low-level threat and toward a high-level corporate or governmental entity. There is an element of chilling control in the subsequent municipal records. Following the unofficial demolition, the site was formally marked on all city maps with a simple, opaque designation, permanently unusable subterranean void. This label ensures the site will never be disturbed or excavated. A feeling of profound distrust colors our understanding of the time. The 1907 to 1910 period was one of rising global tension. The thought of a city's core intention, the second plan, being exposed and potentially compromised by a lone academic would have been a matter of extreme national security. The purpose of the demolition was to achieve total archival silence, physical, political, and historical. The destroyed pumping station, buried under tons of rubble, became the physical manifestation of the archival void the conspiracy sought to create. The identity of the perpetrators remains deliberately obscured by the overlapping layers of the cover-up, the false municipal report masking the secret police operation masking the private industrial contractor. The truth is found in the confluence of these forces. When a lie is constructed with such deliberate complexity, is the aim to simply hide the truth, or is it to ensure that the search for the truth becomes an exhausting, self-defeating spiral? The very act of the unofficial demolition confirms the ultimate success of the copper coil. It had worked too well, revealing a truth so immediate and dangerous that only its absolute, violent erasure could satisfy the unseen guardians of the established reality. Microhook, 1,500 words past. The question of who erased the evidence is fundamentally linked to who stood to lose the most from the existence of the unbuilt city. A pervasive sense of quiet inquiry leads us to consider the specific contractors involved. The single, unauthorized insignia noted by the inspector is the key. In the fragmented commercial archives of the time, this mark points toward a large, specialized consortium known for deep site infrastructure maintenance and possessing clear, though opaque, governmental contracts. There is an element of cold calculation in the destruction. The demolition was not overkill, it was precisely enough force to guarantee the physical destruction of the coil and its surroundings, but not so much as to cause surface damage that would attract unwanted public attention. A feeling of deep vulnerability accompanies the realization that this entity, this consortium or secret bureau, was able to move through the city's infrastructure entirely unnoticed, treating the urban environment as its private, classified domain. The unofficial demolition demonstrates the ultimate power of institutional silence. The police were silenced by a transfer, the municipal workers were bypassed, and the public was placated by a simple, tragic headline. The truth of the city's secret language was buried in the administrative deep. The suppression of the evidence was a preventative measure. The forces that organized this knew that the existence of the urban resonance and the second plan would lead to total social and architectural destabilization if it became public knowledge. What knowledge is so profoundly dangerous that its suppression requires the willing commission of high-level crimes by those sworn to uphold the law? The destruction of the pumping station was not the end of the suppression, it was the establishment of a permanent operational silence. The task force that carried out the unofficial demolition completed its mission perfectly, leaving behind only the fragile, water-damaged note of a single, disillusioned inspector. Microhook, 2,000 words passed. The answer to who erased the evidence points towards a powerful, integrated entity that straddles the line between official state protection and private infrastructural control. Our final thoughts on the unofficial demolition are tinged with a quiet, enduring disquiet. The physical act of destruction speaks volumes about the truth it was designed to hide. It confirms that the city's second plan was considered a clear and present danger to the established world order. There is a final, cold solace in the methodical nature of the operation. The precision of the destruction provides the very evidence of the truth's magnitude. A simple lie was insufficient, only total physical annihilation of the site would suffice. A feeling of vigilance is necessary. The demolition crew succeeded in 1908. But the power structure and the need for archival silence persist. The forces that mobilized the unofficial demolition are still operating, ensuring the continued safety of the unbuilt city's secret. The pumping station, now a buried void, serves as a subterranean monument to the violence required to maintain the illusion of a singular, stable reality. It is a scar that proves the truth of the urban resonance. We conclude by considering the ultimate success of the conspirators. They erased the evidence, they silenced the observer, and they closed the official record. Yet, they failed to account for the single, persistent record of their own hurried, criminal actions. When a clandestine force attempts a total erasure, where is the most likely place for the truth to hide? In the discarded paperwork of a forgotten, transferred official. The unofficial demolition, who erased the evidence, provides the framework for identifying the ultimate guardians of the second plan. The single, crucial piece of information remaining is the identity behind the demolition crew's insignia. We must now turn to the fragments that hint at the corporate power involved, specifically the single surviving, redacted journal entry, a piece of evidence that names the organization responsible for maintaining the ultimate infrastructural silence. The faint moonlight, spilling through the archive window, illuminates the delicate surface of a large, parchment scroll. We now reach the pinnacle of Professor Thorne's discovery. Our first emotion is one of profound wonder. This text is not written in any known language, yet its message is fundamentally architectural. Thorne's final surviving notes, scattered and preserved through sheer luck, describe the process of translating the urban resonance, the city's deep, constant hum, into a coherent, physical form. A feeling of quiet reflection guides us through the professor's methodology. He was not looking for phonetic sound, he was looking for geometric information within the ULF wave patterns. His unique translation key converted the vibrational intensity and frequency into coordinate points and structural loads. There is a powerful nostalgia for the sheer scientific audacity of the act. Thorne was attempting to build a language from the stress points of the physical world, a silent syntax based on gravity and geology. He gave the Earth a voice, and that voice spoke in the language of maps. Our overriding curiosity compels us to focus on the result. The data, when compiled and plotted on a vast, custom grid, did not produce a geological stress map. It produced a structure, a network of lines, boundaries, and spatial designations that were undeniably deliberate. This resulting structure was the translated text. It was a complete, internal blueprint for a metropolis. But when Thorne overlaid this data onto the existing street plan of London, he realized the terrifying truth: the map he had created was of a city that did not exist. Thorne realized that the copper coil was not merely reporting the city's stress, it was articulating its design. The urban resonance was a continuous, informational broadcast of a deep, unseen infrastructure. What is the nature of existence when a complete, complex architectural reality can be recorded and mapped, yet has no physical presence in the known world? The notes refer to this finding as the ghost geometry, a perfect, cohesive design that contradicted the random, organic growth of the visible city above. It was a structural thought running parallel to the physical reality. This was the revelation, a map of the unbuilt city. A sense of intellectual awe is provoked by the precise nature of the ghost geometry. Thorne's translated text was highly detailed, outlining specific load-bearing walls, tunnel routes, and massive, circular foundation pits that had no correlation to any known construction projects, past or present. There is an element of growing suspicion in his later notes. If this map was not historical, and not visible, it had to be prescriptive. The translated text was not a memory of the city, but a continuous structural command, a blueprint for future, unseen construction, broadcast through the constant hum. A profound isolation accompanied the realization of the map's significance. Thorne knew he could not share this finding. The map was not a curiosity, it was a clear indication that a second plan was actively being articulated and sustained beneath the recognized civil authority. The archival fragments show Thorne dedicating weeks to correlating the phantom map with known underground systems, sewers, tube tunnels, decommissioned military bunkers. The result was zero correlation. The unbuilt city was an entirely separate, self-contained structural entity. He began to theorize that the secret language was relaying instructions for a slow, subterranean form of non-human construction, using the vibrational energy of the surface city as its power source. The city was building itself, silently, beneath its inhabitants' feet. If a parallel, intelligent design is actively operating beneath our civilization, are we the beneficiaries of the construction, or merely the oblivious source of its necessary power? The most unnerving feature of the translated text was its internal consistency. Unlike the real city, which was a patchwork of eras, the unbuilt city was structurally and geometrically perfect, designed with a unified, singular purpose. This perfection suggested a powerful, persistent, and non-human intelligence driving the plan. A feeling of quiet dread permeates the phase where Thorne focused on the text's linguistic components. Within the geometric data, specific, complex vibrational patterns repeated like profound, central tenets. These he tentatively translated into concepts. To warn the authorities, he attempted to hide the evidence. He knew that the moment the guardians of the urban resonance realized the map had been read, the response would be total and immediate. A quiet desperation surrounds the archiving of the map itself. Thorne separated the final translation into discrete, non-contiguous fragments, hoping that by destroying the whole, the parts might survive. The scattered notes and data plots we possess are the result of this desperate, final attempt at preservation. The archives hint at the final, unrecoverable piece, the master map, the cohesive original plot of the unbuilt city. It was likely destroyed by Thorne himself, or taken by the forces of the unofficial demolition to prevent any future reconstruction of the secret language. We reflect on the ultimate power of a shared, visual truth. The translated text, as a map, provided a direct, undeniable image of the counter-reality. It was not a theory, it was a blueprint. When faced with a truth that threatens the entire foundational stability of civilization, is the only moral choice to destroy the evidence, thereby preserving the public lie? The map of the unbuilt city was not a relic of the past, it was a command for the future. Its successful translation meant the end of Thorne's life and the beginning of the second plan's ultimate expression. The silent power of the translated text demanded its own suppression. Our final thoughts on the translated text are steeped in quiet, enduring melancholy. The fragments we possess are not enough to reconstruct the map of the unbuilt city entirely, yet they are enough to confirm its existence and its frightening implications. There is a final, cold irony here. The professor, obsessed with finding the stable, ultimate truth of the city, found a stability that was entirely non-human and fundamentally hostile to his own existence. A sense of structural vulnerability remains. The knowledge encoded in the translated text is not gone, it is simply unread. The urban resonance continues to broadcast the structural command for the unbuilt city every second of every day, waiting for another listener. The surviving fragments of the map of the unbuilt city serve as a permanent archival scar, the proof that reality is dual, and that the physical world holds silent, continuous plans for its own profound transformation. We conclude by considering the persistence of the message. The forces of the unofficial demolition destroyed the machine and the location, but they could not destroy the secret language itself, which continues to resonate from the deep structure of the metropolis. If the city is constantly broadcasting the blueprint for its own perfect, unbuilt self, are we, the inhabitants, simply living on borrowed time until the second plan fully resolves? A map of the unbuilt city remains the core, terrifying truth of the entire archive. The discovery of the unbuilt city immediately activated the conspirators. We must now turn to the fragments that hint at the corporate power involved, specifically the single surviving, redacted journal entry, a piece of evidence that names the organization responsible for maintaining the ultimate infrastructural silence, the faint, rhythmic tick-tock of a geochronometer, monitoring the slow shift of the continental crust, pulses in the quiet room. We begin our architectural analysis, the methodical, calm process of confronting the physical world with the terrifying geometry of the unseen. Our first emotion is one of clinical wonder. We are engaged in a high-stakes comparison, taking the fragmented data from Professor Thorne's translated text, the geometric patterns derived from the urban resonance, and attempting to overlay them onto the meticulously documented maps of modern city infrastructure. A feeling of quiet reflection settles as we lay the fragmented ghost layout onto the digital grid. The lines of the unbuilt city are clean, severe, and unified. They contrast sharply with the actual infrastructure, a chaotic, organic growth of overlapping tunnels, Victorian sewers, and modern fiber optic routes. There is a powerful nostalgia for the notion of a simple, known city. Our analysis must discard the assumption that the physical map is the primary truth. We must entertain Thorne's hypothesis: the visible city is merely a noise overlaying the deep, persistent, resonant reality of the second plan. Our overriding curiosity compels us to search for points of parity. Where do the lines of the ghost layout, the structural commands articulated by the secret language, coincide precisely with major features of the modern, tangible infrastructure? Do the ghost walls overlap with modern subway routes, or the phantom foundations intersect with major bridge abutments? The initial findings are unsettlingly suggestive. While the majority of the ghost layout is distinct, the major arterial lines of the unbuilt city often appear to frame existing, critical pieces of infrastructure, suggesting the second plan uses the visible reality as scaffolding. This analysis forces us to adopt Thorne's own psychological stance: the city is a single, dual-layered document. The human-built layer is chaotic and fleeting, the resonant layer is permanent and structural. What does it imply when the hidden, structural commands of a parallel reality align perfectly with the most critical, load-bearing features of our known world, the focus shifts to the oldest infrastructure, the Roman roads, the earliest sewer lines, the deep wells. These foundational elements, being the most stable and resonant, are the most likely points of synchronization between the two cities. Our architectural analysis is an attempt to decipher which parts of the visible city are truly ours, and which parts belong to the unbuilt city's enduring design. A sense of pervasive precision is required for this comparison. We must rely on the mathematical certainty of Thorne's translation key, cross-referencing his geometric vibrational data with precise, subsurface topographical surveys. There is an element of quiet tension inherent in the task. Each point of perfect overlap between the ghost layout and the modern infrastructure is a moment of confirmation, a physical validation of the theory of urban resonance and the active nature of the second plan. A powerful feeling of intellectual vindication arises from the discovery of parity points. We find that key, massive, deep-site constructions, the central pillar foundations for major railway viaducts, for instance, often sit precisely where the ghost layout indicated a major structural node. These nodes, translated from the subterranean hum, appear to be the anchoring points of the unbuilt city, the foundational infrastructure upon which the hidden design stabilizes itself against the geological movements of the earth. Thorne's notes speak of structural sympathy, the idea that the two cities are not entirely separate, but are in a constant, vibrational dialogue. The unbuilt city is leveraging the material stability of the human-built world. If the most enduring parts of our city are secretly serving as the foundation for an alternate, invisible infrastructure, are we the beneficiaries of their stability, or are we simply the accidental providers of their power? The analysis of the ghost layout reveals that the structural lines are almost entirely subterranean, suggesting the unbuilt city exists primarily as a network of deep tunnels, vaults, and foundations, mirroring the urban world, but always hidden. The architectural analysis proves that the translated text is not abstract, it is a literal topographical map of an ongoing, active construction project. A sense of structural awe is evoked by the realization of the scale. The ghost layout suggests a unified, interconnected system far more efficient and massive than the known infrastructure. Its lines bypass geological faults and avoid surface clutter, reflecting a design logic governed only by stability and resonance. There is an element of chilling control in the map's pattern. Every line, every node of the unbuilt city, serves a clear, functional purpose in relation to the urban resonance. It is a perfect, logical, and ultimately inhuman design. A powerful feeling of uncertainty accompanies the mapping of the boundaries. We find vast, empty spaces in the known world where the ghost layout indicates densely packed, massive structures. These areas represent pockets of potential, places where the second plan has yet to manifest its design into the visible spectrum. The process of matching the ghost layout reveals an ongoing state of asymmetry. The physical city is constantly changing, but the resonant plan remains constant, correcting for human error and continually asserting its original, geometric will. Thorne realized that by studying the discrepancies, he was watching the second plan in motion, observing where the resonance was asserting its geometric will over the chaotic reality of human development. When a city is structurally compelled toward a predetermined, geometric fate, how much does human agency truly factor into its ultimate form? The crucial archival detail here is a fragmented note from Thorne referencing the load-bearing lie. He theorized that the visible city's foundations were deliberately placed to accommodate and support the resonant frequencies of the unbuilt city, creating a symbiotic relationship of stability. The architectural analysis confirms that the ghost layout is the superior, controlling document in the relationship between the two cities. He realized that while the bulk of the ULF signal was structural data, it contained a short, repeating segment that was purely semantic. A feeling of quiet reflection guides us through the surviving data logs. They are filled with complex symbols, a blend of Greek letters, topographical markers, and unique geometric icons. Thorne attempted to translate this repeating sequence not into architectural forms, but into conceptual language. There is a powerful nostalgia for the moment of intellectual terror. Thorne must have felt when the meaningless pattern suddenly resolved itself into a coherent, repeating phrase. It was the moment the city's bones stopped providing data and started issuing a statement. Our overriding curiosity compels us to examine the two possible interpretations he recorded in his notes. Was this linguistic core a warning, a safety shutoff, or a threat intended for the builders of the unbuilt city? Or was it a blueprint, the fundamental command, the ultimate instruction driving the second plan? The phrase, documented faintly in a margin, is starkly simple, utterly detached from human grammar, yet profoundly meaningful in its context of structural physics. It repeats every 49.7 hours in the resonance cycle, a constant, rhythmic pulse of meaning. The phrase's power lies in its persistent, non-human origin. It was not broadcast by a radio, it was generated by the synchronized vibrational stress of millions of tons of stone and steel. What intellectual burden must a scientist bear when he realizes the world is speaking to him, and the message is both simple and apocalyptic? Thorne's notes suggest a profound shift in his mental state. He moved from observer to recipient, realizing that the recurring phrase might not be for posterity, but for the activation of the ghost layout he had just mapped. The question of whether it is a warning or a blueprint defines the professor's final moral dilemma. A sense of structural symmetry dominates the professor's analysis of the phrase's frequency. The 49.7-hour cycle is precisely 1/5 of the total structural resonance cycle he had previously charted, suggesting it is a timed, programmatic message. There is an element of growing apprehension as we realize the phrase is not merely semantic, it is a temporal marker. It segments the flow of the urban resonance, perhaps marking the beginning or the completion of a stage in the unbuilt city's continuous self-assembly. A powerful feeling of isolation settles upon us. Thorne was the only living being who understood the phrase's content, and therefore, the only one who understood the implications of its relentless repetition every 2 days. His early attempts at translation favored the warning hypothesis. He hoped the message was a safety protocol, a final check against instability, perhaps asserting, system check complete, or, containment field nominal. He clung to the hope that the resonance was neutral, not intentional. Thorne's psychological shift is marked by the desperate search for neutrality. He wanted the city's language to be a report, not a command. The alternative, that the phrase was an active instruction, was too terrifying to accept immediately. When a mind encounters a truth that violates the fundamental laws of its world, how long can it resist the terrifying, inevitable conclusion? The complexity of the geometry underlying the phrase suggested a message of high importance. It occupied the most stable, most enduring frequency band in the entire subterranean hum, confirming its status as the most fundamental communication. The recurring phrase was the ultimate sound of the second plan asserting its presence. A sense of intellectual tension arises from the moment Thorne began to translate the phrase through the blueprint hypothesis. He ran the geometric data through his key, assigning conceptual value based on architectural action rather than structural report. There is an element of clinical determination in this shift. He realized the phrase's internal syntax suggested a verb followed by a state, an instruction for action and a resulting condition. This structure was far more dangerous than a simple warning. A profound feeling of clarity emerges when he records the final, preferred translation. Though the phrase's exact English rendering is lost, its essential meaning pointed toward, the boundary must be dissolved, stabilization is ongoing. Or, more simply, expansion in progress. The persistence of the phrase confirms its function. It was not a one-time message, it was a continuous command, repeated every 49.7 hours, constantly reinforcing the primary structural directive of the unbuilt city. Thorne's final notes show his acceptance of the truth. The city was not warning him, it was executing a command. The recurring phrase was the city's self-affirmation, the ultimate assertion of the second plan's structural will. If the very ground beneath us is constantly whispering an instruction for its own transformation, what does that make the visible city, a temporary state, or an unfortunate impediment? The most chilling aspect of the phrase being a blueprint is the implication that the urban resonance is intelligent, self-aware, and possesses a long-term goal for the structural reality of the metropolis. The recurring phrase was not a question, it was an absolute order for expansion. A feeling of escalating paranoia surfaces as Thorne realized the source of the phrase. It was not an external signal, it was an internal function of the urban resonance itself. The copper coil was not receiving a foreign transmission, it was decoding the city's internal dialogue. There is an element of structural inevitability in the phrase's repetition. It suggested that the plan was unstoppable, inherent in the geometry of the physical load. The city must expand according to the command of the resonance. A powerful sense of resignation accompanies his final archival action. He knew that the recurring phrase, as a blueprint, validated the need for the unofficial demolition that would follow. The guardians of the second plan could not allow the public to learn that the city was operating on an expansionist structural directive. The phrase is the definitive link between the physical geometry of the map of the unbuilt city and the ultimate command in the final letter. A second plan is now active. The recurring phrase is the activation sequence. Thorne's final act was to record the phrase's existence, knowing that by doing so, he sealed his fate. He was archiving a message that demonstrated a clear, non-human will operating beneath the human world. When a mind confronts a truth that reveals the entire world to be a stage for a secret, permanent plan, is intellectual curiosity the greatest liability? The simplicity of the recurring phrase is its power. It is short, undeniable, and constantly active, a hypnotic command reinforcing the fundamental, unbuilt reality. The phrase shifts from a warning to an instruction in the last days of the pumping station. Our final thoughts on the recurring phrase are defined by quiet, profound disquiet. The structural language of the city, once discovered, cannot be unheard. The phrase continues to resonate, even with the copper coil destroyed and the professor vanished. There is a final, cold irony in the phrase's endurance. The conspirators behind the unofficial demolition succeeded in silencing the messenger, but they could not silence the message itself, which is woven into the very fabric of the city's foundations. A sense of structural permanence remains. The phrase, whether a warning or a blueprint, exists outside human intervention. It is a natural, cyclical assertion of the second plan's will, a constant, vibrational declaration of its right to exist and expand. The recurring phrase is the ultimate archival secret, the sound of a city planning its own future, indifferent to the lives built upon its back. We conclude by acknowledging the persistence of the secret. Every 49.7 hours, the urban resonance repeats the command for expansion, a quiet, inexorable countdown toward the physical manifestation of the unbuilt city. If the ultimate blueprint for the city is being broadcast continuously, is there any way to truly stop the second plan, or can we only delay its ultimate, structural completion? The recurring phrase, a warning or a blueprint, remains the key to understanding the city's self-will. The persistent message of the phrase required a continuous effort to maintain the subsequent silence. We must now turn to the fragments that hint at the corporate power involved in that continuous effort, specifically the single surviving, redacted journal entry, the one document that names the organization responsible for maintaining the ultimate infrastructural silence. The amber glow of the candles danced across the worn manuscripts, each page whispering secrets of a forgotten past. We now examine the absence, the deliberate historical void that followed Professor Silas Thorne's vanishing, archival silence. Our first emotion is one of cold wonder at the completeness of the erasure. We are searching for records not of the discovery itself, but of the existence of the discoverer. Yet, in the official files of the university, the learned societies, and the municipal registrar, Thorne simply ceases to be a productive entity after 1907. A feeling of quiet reflection settles as we consider the efficiency required for such a clean sweep. To remove a man of some public standing, a university professor, from the intellectual record requires coordination across multiple, historically disparate institutions. This was not negligence, it was concerted action. There is a powerful nostalgia for the notion of bureaucratic chaos. Usually, paper survives due to inefficiency. A misfiled note, a forgotten carbon copy. In the case of Professor Thorne, the opposite occurred. Every relevant document was systematically identified and neutralized. Our overriding curiosity compels us to trace the lines of the official narrative. The official record of tragic industrial accident was the outward lie, but the archival silence was the internal reality, the immediate command to classify all associated research, papers, and communications as non-existent. The archive confirms that all university records of his grant applications were purged. His students were quietly transferred away from his field of study. Even the library circulation records show a systematic withdrawal of the specific, obscure texts Thorne had been using for his work on the urban resonance. This complete silence is the strongest validation of Thorne's success. The conspiracy knew that the core discovery, the theory of urban resonance, could not be dismissed as fantasy if the research trail was left intact. What level of coordination is required to ensure that every single paper trace of an idea is rendered invisible across departments and even years? It speaks to an absolute, central authority. The archival void extends to his correspondence. Letters to scientific journals detailing his early, tentative findings were returned to the senders stamped, unsolicited, unreceived. The suppression was thorough, reaching even into the postal system itself. Archival silence is the chilling proof of the threat posed by the secret language. A sense of structural awe is evoked by the breadth of the eradication. The total eradication of Thorne's work extended even to the physical artifacts. The massive custom components of the copper coil, the immense lengths of specialized wire, the custom-milled iron cores, vanished without a receipt or a supply order trail. There is an element of grim efficiency in this physical removal. The forces behind the unofficial demolition did not merely destroy the machine, they dismantled its origin story, ensuring that no subsequent researcher could ever reconstruct the apparatus from surviving bills of lading or purchase orders. A powerful feeling of quiet insecurity settles upon us. If a state or clandestine corporate entity can make tons of custom equipment disappear without a single bureaucratic echo, what does that imply about the stability of the public record itself? The archives reveal no cross-reference between the decommissioned pumping station and Professor Thorne's name. They are two separate, clean documents. The station is an industrial void, Thorne is a non-person. The crucial link between the two was severed with surgical precision. The conspirators understood that true suppression requires not just the destruction of documents, but the elimination of the metadata, the secondary information that links names, places, and materials. When the most profound truths are found in the empty spaces of the historical record, how does one ever hope to rebuild the narrative of the past? The archival silence speaks of a fear that goes beyond mere public relations. It suggests a terror of the theory of urban resonance being independently rediscovered, forcing the conspirators to eliminate every potential pathway back to the truth. The emptiness of the archives is, in itself, the overwhelming evidence of the Second Plan's protection protocols. A sense of intellectual vulnerability is exposed by the archival actions taken against Thorne's theoretical framework. Even the intellectual concept of the urban resonance was subtly quarantined in the academic literature. There is an element of calculated misdirection in the library catalogs. Entries related to ULF phenomena and structural acoustics were cross-referenced with discredited pseudoscience, subtly pushing the entire field of acoustic physics into the realm of fringe eccentricity. Discouraging future research. A powerful feeling of deep distrust accompanies the realization that the suppression was not limited to administrative files but extended into the very structure of public knowledge. The goal was to make the pursuit of the secret language seem irrational and scientifically unsound. The total eradication of Thorne's work ensured that the next researcher to stumble upon the principles of the subterranean hum would have no academic precedent, no prior work to build upon, forcing them to start from scratch, a high-stakes deterrent. The conspirators demonstrated an understanding of psychological control. They knew that a brilliant man's work can be killed not by condemnation, but by isolation and historical invisibility. What is the ultimate purpose of archival silence? Is it to protect the state from embarrassment, or is it to ensure the smooth, uninterrupted progress of a clandestine, structural command? The completeness of the erasure makes the survival of the final letter and the water-damaged police supplement miraculous. These two documents are the only physical material that escaped the digital, systematic sweep of the archival silence. The void surrounding Professor Thorne is the most telling chapter in the history of the Unbuilt City. A sense of final, cold irony permeates the comparison between the official silence and the truth. The city continues to hum, the recurring phrase continues to assert its command, yet the historical record maintains the lie of the tragic industrial accident. There is an element of persistent vigilance required to guard against this silence. The forces that enacted the total eradication remain active, ensuring that the historical void is maintained and that no new documents emerge to challenge the official narrative. A powerful feeling of quiet vulnerability accompanies the realization that our entire understanding of the city's history is contingent on the fragility of two surviving, damaged pieces of paper. The rest of the archive is a beautiful, but deliberate, lie. The ultimate aim of the archival silence was to ensure that the second plan would operate in perpetuity without fear of human interference, protected by the historical invisibility of its only documented discovery. We conclude by acknowledging the cold, rational power of the conspirators. They did not leave a shred of evidence because they understood that, in the long term, silence is total control over historical interpretation. When the history of a city is intentionally sterilized, how can the modern researcher distinguish between an actual non-event and a perfectly executed, total eradication? The enduring legacy of archival silence is the proof that the truth of the urban resonance was too powerful to be allowed even the smallest archival footprint. The total absence of record surrounding Thorne makes the eventual emergence of the single surviving, redacted journal entry an even greater violation of the established silence. We must now turn to this final, damaged document to glimpse the identity of the powerful organization that achieved this perfect archival void, the distant echo of a city, a low, constant rumble muffled by the historical distance of a century, drifts through the archive. We journey back to 1907, a time of precarious peace, to understand the national security panic triggered by Professor Thorne's discovery. Our first emotion is one of cold wonder at the global context. The period immediately preceding the First World War was defined by intense rivalry and suspicion among the great powers. London, the heart of the British Empire, was a nexus of intelligence, finance, and industrial might. Maintaining its stability was the paramount concern of Whitehall, the center of British government. A feeling of quiet reflection settles as we consider the concept of national security in this era. It was less about distant military threats and more about the fundamental structural integrity of the capital itself. A city is only as strong as its foundations, both physical and political. There is a powerful nostalgia for the perceived clarity of political threats. Yet, Professor Thorne introduced a threat that was entirely new, an internal, infrastructural vulnerability articulated by the urban resonance. He proved the city's structure was communicating a secret truth. Our overriding curiosity compels us to understand the government's specific fear. Thorne's discovery of the translated text, the map of the unbuilt city, would have been seen not as scientific curiosity, but as a catastrophic intelligence leak. If the city was broadcasting its structural plan, could an enemy intercept it? The pre-war urgency was defined by the sudden, terrifying need to establish absolute control over this new domain, the acoustic physics of the deep city. The truth was that Thorne's work compromised the structural integrity of the nation's command center. The high-level officials at Whitehall, the ministers, and the Secret Service chiefs, would have focused immediately on the implications of the recurring phrase being a blueprint. An active, self-building second plan was an intolerable risk. What is the first priority of a global empire when its capital city is revealed to be built upon a secret, self-optimizing rival structure? The only answer is immediate, total suppression. The mere possibility that the subterranean hum could be intercepted by foreign agents, perhaps the nascent German intelligence services, obsessed with technological advantage, was enough to trigger the total eradication of Thorne's work. Whitehall needed absolute control because the acoustic stability of London was synonymous with imperial stability. A sense of structural paranoia dominates the internal memos from the period. The officials were not worried about the idea of the unbuilt city, they were terrified of the physics of the urban resonance. If Thorne could tap into the hum, so could others. There is an element of chilling speed in the governmental response. The decision to fake the tragic industrial accident and authorize the unofficial demolition was made not in weeks, but likely in hours, overriding all standard bureaucratic procedures. A powerful feeling of vulnerability surfaces when we consider the officials' perspective. Their entire system of governance rested upon the assumption of physical and administrative stability. Thorne revealed a chaotic, powerful counter-reality right beneath their feet. The pre-war urgency meant there was no time for peer review or scientific debate. The threat was treated as an active, existential weapon. The copper coil was viewed not as a scientific instrument, but as a dangerous, highly effective spying device. Whitehall's response was guided by the need for plausible deniability. The destruction of the pumping station had to be absolute, and the official record had to be simple, ensuring that even if the story leaked, it would be dismissed as the raving of a marginalized academic. When the preservation of national stability rests upon the enforcement of a massive historical lie, how much administrative oversight is discarded in the pursuit of absolute silence? The erasure was also about controlling the language. Thorne's successful translation of the secret language meant that the very terminology of civil engineering, foundation, load-bearing, tunnel, was now potentially compromised. Whitehall needed to ensure that no one else ever spoke of resonance in a classified context. The decision to ensure absolute control was a cold, rational calculation of imperial defense. A sense of intellectual analysis focuses on the specific ministries involved in the cover-up. The sheer coordination suggests the involvement of the highest levels of the Home Office, the Admiralty and, crucially, the newly formed Committee of Imperial Defense. There is an element of necessary complexity in their method of suppression. They didn't just issue an order, they created a self-sealing loop. The official record provided the narrative cover, the unofficial demolition provided the physical destruction, and the subsequent archival silence provided the historical erasure. A powerful feeling of quiet determination underscores the action. The officials were committed to destroying the knowledge of the unbuilt city and ensuring that the structural secrets of the British capital remained invisible and unreadable. The pre-war urgency provided the perfect context for the crime. In the shadow of inevitable conflict, extreme measures, like silencing a professor, could be justified, executed quickly, and then permanently buried under the weight of more pressing global concerns. Whitehall understood that the urban resonance represented not just a local London problem, but a universal principle. If London was broadcasting a second plan, then so were Berlin, Paris, and St. Petersburg. The first nation to achieve absolute control over the principle would possess a terrifying, invisible advantage. If the goal is to prevent a technology from ever being rediscovered, is it more effective to destroy the machine, or to destroy the concept itself in the collective academic consciousness? The control extended to Professor Thorne's remaining family. The archive details hint at a generous, yet strictly conditional, settlement for his fiancée, Henrietta, a financial bribe for silence, ensuring the tragic accident narrative would not be publicly questioned. The suppression was a total war against an invisible, acoustic truth. A pervasive sense of quiet distrust defines the final outcome. The immediate closure of the case, the swift transfer of the diligent police inspector who filed the water-damaged supplement, and the total silence from the scientific community all point to a singular, authoritative command emanating from the highest levels of Whitehall. There is an element of strategic hypocrisy in the government's action. While publicly projecting an image of stability and democratic order, they were secretly mobilizing specialized crews and explosives to commit a crime in the heart of the capital to preserve a structural secret. A powerful feeling of vulnerability remains for the professor himself. He was erased not because his science was wrong, but because it was tragically, profoundly right at the worst possible time. His timing collided violently with the pre-war urgency. The absolute control they sought was over the foundational laws of the city itself. By destroying the copper coil, Whitehall declared its intent to be the sole arbiter of the city's structural reality, regardless of the deeper, geological truth of the urban resonance. The chilling takeaway for the archival researcher is the power of the central authority to define historical fact. Whitehall needed absolute control to maintain the integrity of their lie, ensuring that the second plan could continue its silent, uninterrupted progress under the protection of the state. When a government commits a permanent crime to safeguard an invisible structural advantage, does that action itself become a codified, continuous function of the state? The entire episode served as a grim rehearsal for the information wars of the 20th century, demonstrating the cold, efficient use of bureaucracy to suppress scientific truths that threaten national structural stability. The archival silence is the enduring monument to the fear of the unbuilt city. Our final thoughts on the pre-war urgency are charged with quiet, enduring disquiet. The structural reality of the unbuilt city continues to assert itself through the urban resonance, unaffected by the political machinations of the surface world. Whitehall achieved control over the information, but not over the phenomenon. There is a final, cold solace in the persistence of the message. Despite the total eradication of Thorne's work, the geometric imperatives of the recurring phrase continue to pulse beneath the foundations, a constant threat to the official silence. A sense of structural vulnerability remains. The effort expended by Whitehall proves the severity of the threat. The expense, the risk, and the criminality were all deemed necessary to protect the secret of the second plan. The absolute control they sought was imperfect, betrayed by the fragility of human integrity, the lone, water-damaged police report, and the loyalty of a fiancé who kept a final, unsent letter. We conclude by considering the persistence of the invisible. The most powerful force in the story is not the empire, it is the urban resonance itself, the silent, geologic will of the city that demanded its truth be known. When the state fights a secret war against the structural reality of its own capital, is the victory truly achievable, or is the effort itself merely a temporary delay of the inevitable? The pre-war urgency turned a scientific discovery into an act of treason, demanding absolute control. The success of the Whitehall operation depended on the use of specialized, unidentifiable demolition crews. We must now turn to the fragments that hint at the corporate power involved, specifically the single surviving redacted journal entry, the one document that names the organization responsible for maintaining the ultimate infrastructural silence. The distant echo of a city's nocturnal silence settles around us, deep and absolute. We rest in this stillness, allowing the calm to deepen as we contemplate the final, lingering terror of the archive, the quiet dread of the hidden infrastructure. Our first emotion is one of gentle wonder at the simplicity of the fear. It is not the dread of invasion or sudden disaster, but the profound, structural unease that comes from realizing the ground beneath us is not inert, but actively engaged in a secret, separate reality. A feeling of quiet reflection guides us, urging us to look past the visible. Professor Thorne's work revealed that the urban resonance constantly broadcasts the geometry of the unbuilt city. The dread is born from the knowledge that the world we inhabit is only the surface layer of a deeper, more permanent design. There is a powerful nostalgia for the time before this knowledge, when a foundation was simply a foundation. Now, we know the largest, most stable structures, the deep pilings, the monumental tunnel vaults, are secretly serving as the anchor points for the second plan. Our overriding curiosity compels us to examine the nature of this unseen presence. The hidden infrastructure is silent, perfect, and tireless. Its existence is confirmed by the faint, continuous hum that our ears cannot detect, a sound that proves the city's structural self-will is perpetually active. The dread is quiet because the secret language is non-verbal. It communicates its purpose through structural command, through geometry and load-bearing logic, a language that is utterly indifferent to the lives of the millions built upon its back. The most unsettling realization is the lack of any human hand in the persistence of the plan. The hidden infrastructure requires no funding, no construction permits, and no human direction. It is powered by the natural physics of the metropolis itself, the ultimate autonomous entity. What psychological effect does it have on the informed mind to realize that the most permanent, most enduring reality of their environment is entirely hostile to their fleeting, human scale? The dread is compounded by the knowledge of the total eradication of Thorne's work. The violence of the unofficial demolition proves that the second plan is guarded by a powerful, ruthless authority, ensuring the surface world remains unaware of the truth. This quiet, continuous paranoia is the ultimate legacy of the urban resonance. A sense of structural vulnerability pervades our thoughts. The hidden infrastructure is not a passive threat, it is defined by the recurring phrase, the continuous, rhythmic command for expansion and optimization. The city is preparing itself for an eventual, physical manifestation. There is an element of chilling certainty in the geometric design. The ghost layout is perfectly logical, reflecting a structural intent that is superior to the chaotic, human-built city. This perfection breeds the deepest unease, the fear that the correct city is the invisible one. A powerful feeling of quiet resignation settles upon us. We realize that the architectural analysis confirms our current world is merely an ephemeral state, a scaffolding for the permanent, resonant design. Our daily existence is simply the noise overlaying the structural signal. The dread is focused on the future. The second plan is patient, operating on a geological timetable, asserting its structural will through subtle, continuous pressure. Every unexplained sinkhole, every minor magnetic anomaly, every structural failure becomes a potential sign of the unbuilt city asserting its dominance. We reflect on the ultimate powerlessness of human intention against this structural force. Our political and financial systems operate on the assumption of a stable, controllable environment. Thorne's archive proves this assumption is a deliberate, necessary lie. When the most solid reality, the ground, is revealed to be the source of the most profound instability, where can the mind find refuge or control? The dread is quiet because it is constant. It is the awareness that we live in a state of permanent, structural impermanence, built upon a secret that is always being broadcast but never heard. The hidden infrastructure is always there, waiting. The quiet dread of the hidden infrastructure is a feeling preserved only by the survival of the archive. The conspirators who enforced the archival silence knew they could not stop the plan, only hide the knowledge of its existence. We must now turn to the fragments that hint at the corporate power involved in that continuous act of concealment, specifically the final redacted journal entry, which names the organization responsible for maintaining the ultimate infrastructural silence. The final flicker of the torchlight casts long, dancing shadows across the archived maps, leaving only the soft moonlight to illuminate the historical silence. We now contemplate the unsettling legacy of Professor Thorne's work, stretching his century-old discovery into our present day. Our first emotion is one of gentle wonder at the resilience of the truth. Despite the violent unofficial demolition and the comprehensive archival silence, the fundamental question posed by the translated text persists: is the second plan still active? A feeling of quiet reflection settles as we consider the nature of the urban resonance. Thorne proved the city's deep structure constantly broadcasts the blueprint for the unbuilt city. The unsettling legacy lies in the fact that the physics governing this hum have not changed since 1907. There is a powerful nostalgia for the time when this question was theoretical. Now, with the confirmation of the ghost layout and the command of the recurring phrase, the question becomes an active, structural concern affecting every modern infrastructure decision. Our overriding curiosity compels us to examine modern anomalies. Do present-day deep site excavations ever encounter unusual resistance, or prefabricated, non-functional structures that correlate with Thorne's ghost layout? We look for the faint, physical echoes of a construction project running continuously for over a century. The dread is quiet because the progress of the second city would be agonizingly slow, moving on a structural, geological timeline. It is not a sudden catastrophe, but a continuous, subtle process of structural synchronization. We encounter the chilling realization that every modern engineering project, every new subway tunnel, every skyscraper foundation, may be unknowingly contributing to the second plan. We may be the unwitting labor force for the hidden infrastructure. What does it mean for human agency when the continuous, silent will of the inanimate world shapes our future more effectively than our political planning? The unsettling legacy is the total loss of control over the deep environment. The forces that enacted the original cover-up are still operating, ensuring the silence is maintained while the second city continues its slow, programmed growth. The question is not if the plan continues, but when the unbuilt city will achieve critical mass and fully assert its superior, geometric will. A sense of structural vulnerability pervades our thoughts as we contemplate the cumulative effect of a century's worth of expansion in progress. The recurring phrase, the command for optimization, has repeated over 44,000 times since Thorne disappeared. There is an element of chilling certainty in the lack of recent, unexplained deep site findings. The silence in modern geological reports suggests that the forces behind the unofficial demolition learned their lesson and are now maintaining a state of perfect, total information control over any structural anomalies. A powerful feeling of quiet resignation settles upon us. The second plan is permanent. It is not a conspiracy that can be overthrown, but a fundamental truth of the city's self-will, woven into the physics of its structure. The true dread lies in the possibility of the second city's purpose. Is its final form meant to enhance the existing metropolis, or is it designed to contain, quarantine, or even replace the chaotic, human-built structure above? We reflect on the subtle changes to the city over the last century, the sudden, deep infrastructural shifts, the inexplicable rerouting of utility tunnels, the unexpected closure of deep basements. Are these random acts of maintenance, or are they minor, necessary adjustments dictated by the structural imperative of the ghost layout? If the second city is still being built, what is the nature of the existence it is preparing to house, and does that existence include us? The unsettling legacy is the silent, ongoing proof that Thorne was right. The city has a secret language, it has an active plan, and it is executing that plan without our knowledge, beneath the protection of an enduring, total silence. The persistent question, is the second city still being built, is answered by the continued silence of the official record. The total eradication of Thorne's work proves the plan is too important to expose. We must now turn to the fragments that hint at the corporate power involved in that continuous act of concealment, specifically the final redacted journal entry, which names the organization responsible for maintaining the ultimate infrastructural silence.